Chapter 702. On the side, Yu Qianqiu sighed endlessly. Divine dragons were locked underground not for hundreds or thousands of years, but for tens of thousands of years at every turn. Who could say for sure how many years had passed since the ancient times, but it was probably more than 100,000 years. It was terrifying to think about being locked up for so many years. Just as he was shaking his head with his master, Yu Qianqiu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said excitedly, "Master, why don't we think of a way to release the divine dragon? Think about it. We're both abiding by the agreement with the demon lord of 10,000 swords, so we should be on the same side. A divine dragon, a god-tier expert. With a divine dragon guarding the devil domain, who in the world would dare to do anything to the devil domain? Hee. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. Even he admired his own cleverness for coming up with such a good idea. He couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. Bai Changchun looked at him speechlessly. It was hard to associate his disciple's expression with that of a good person. He then said coldly, "It's true that the divine dragon's cultivation is high, but don't misunderstand. The divine dragon is also a member of the divine beasts. Just because it has the word divine, doesn't mean it's a god-tier expert." Yu Qianqiu's sinister laughter stopped abruptly, and his expression twitched. "Master, you mean that the divine dragon isn't necessarily very powerful?" Bai Changchun nodded. "It's not that it's not powerful, but the so-called divine beasts are beasts with supernatural powers. They have innate advantages that other beasts can't compare to. After cultivation, they all have the possibility of reaching the god tier. As for other beasts, it's not so easy to reach the god tier. The divine dragon's cultivation definitely hasn't reached the god tier. You should know that the demon lord of 10,000 swords didn't even reach the god tier when he died. Think about it, how could he control a god tier dragon? If the divine dragon really reached the god tier, the demon lord of 10,000 swords wouldn't have died with the divine dragon protecting him. Even with the myriad swords demon monarch's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to trap the divine dragon underground for so many years. I'm afraid that the divine dragon has already broken free from its shackles and escaped. Even if its cultivation hasn't reached the god level, it's probably many times stronger than the experts in the cultivation world, right?" Yu Qianqiu said weakly. Judging from his tone, he seemed to be unwilling to give up. It seemed like he really wanted to get a divine dragon to protect him. Bai Changchun nodded slightly and said, "The masters of the cultivation world definitely can't be compared to the divine dragon. Although the divine dragon is not a match for the immortal emperor and the emperor of the underworld, it is still qualified to fight against them. Think about it, how can the masters of the cultivation world be compared to it? At least my current cultivation is definitely not comparable to the divine dragon. Then isn't it just right to let it out to guard the demon region?" Yu Qianqiu finally couldn't help but voice his desire. At this time, his mind was not thinking about letting the dragon god protect the devil's domain. Instead, he was thinking about building a relationship with the dragon god. When the time came, he would have the final say in the cultivation world. He could do whatever he wanted and he would not have to work so hard anymore. "I advise you to give up on this idea." Bai Changchun stared at him coldly and said in a deep voice, "The world is full of changes. The dragon god has been detained for so many years. No one knows what it is thinking now. Can you guarantee that it will be a good thing if it is released? Once its bestial nature is unleashed, it will definitely bring disaster to the whole world. When that time comes, who can control it? Can you control it? This must be one of the reasons why the demon lord of swords detained it. Moreover, the shackles that the demon lord of swords set on the dragon god cannot be broken with the dragon god's cultivation. Do you think that the two of us can break it with our cultivation?" Hee. I was just saying it casually. If it doesn't work, then forget it. Hee. Yu Qianqiu smiled awkwardly. He was also shocked when he thought of the scene of the red guy roaring to the world and going berserk. He was just thinking of using the gold technique that he cultivated to try and break the shackles of the dragon god. Now it seemed that it was better to let the dragon continue to stay underground. He did not want to go for wool and come home shorn. When the time came, he would not be able to help but become a scourge instead. "I have told you everything that needs to be said. If there is nothing else." Bai Changchun looked out the door slowly and sighed leisurely. Then, my mission is completed. It is time to go. He had always been calm, but now his words were filled with complicated emotions. Yu Qianqiu closed his lips tightly and looked at his master, who was sighing. He was a little speechless. No matter how cold-hearted his master was, leaving this place where he had stayed for thousands of years would be a little emotional. According to his master, he was the one who had been in charge of the demon region for the longest time among all the torturers. Moreover, his master was not a cold-hearted person. He was just a warm person on the inside and cold on the outside. Yu Qianqiu slowly lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, "Master, why don't you not leave? I'm afraid I can't handle it alone. In fact, I wanted to leave 300 years ago. Unfortunately, I haven't found a suitable person to take charge of the demon region. That's why it has been delayed until now." Bai Changchun showed a rare smile and said with a faint smile, "Now it is time to leave. I believe you can do it well. Even if you can't do it well, there must be a reason for this." Yu Qianqiu looked up and said, "Master, don't you think Senior Wen Lanfeng is more suitable to take charge of the demon region? He is not a bad person. No one in the cultivation world is his match except for you. I want someone who can shoulder a heavy burden, not a good person. If a good person can solve the problem, there are many better people in the world. Why do I need to find him?" Bai Changchun snorted and said, "Even if you didn't appear, Wen Lanfeng would at most be my second choice. I spared his life twice just in case. If there is no other way, I will let him take charge of the demon region." Yu Qianqiu was stunned and could not help asking, "Why?" Bai Changchun showed an air of arrogance and said, "Wen Lanfeng, this person's cultivation talent is indeed good compared to others. In terms of cultivation, he is indeed suitable to take charge of the demon region. But this person is decisive. A woman can make him dizzy. He has a gentle personality and lacks ruthlessness in handling things. As a person who controls the overall situation, these are his fatal weaknesses. If he takes charge of the demon region, he will be used by people with ulterior motives sooner or later. If I really entrust the demon region to him, I am afraid I will first have to massacre all the soul formation masters in the world before I can be more or less relieved. But even so, it is not a long-term solution. A fatal weakness is a fatal weakness, and it is difficult to change. If I kill this group of people who can use him, there will be another group of people who can use him. I can't kill everyone in the world for the demon region, right?" As he said this, he looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, "But you are different. I have been silently observing you for a long time. On the surface, you do things by hook or by crook to achieve your goals. You are even cruel and merciless, but you always have a kind heart. This prevents you from being unable to control your ambition and becoming an ambitious person. A person who controls the overall situation can't be soft-hearted. You should be decisive when things happen. Thunder and blood are all means, not results, so you must know right from wrong, good from evil and right from wrong. In this regard, you are more suitable to take charge of the demon region than Nongzhu. As for other reasons, I will not say." "Damn it! Is this a compliment or a scolding?" Yu Qianqiu touched his nose awkwardly and quickly changed the topic. "Then who is the first candidate? Is it Senior Nongzhu?" "Yes, not only did the former punishment commissioner take a fancy to him, but so did I." Bai Changchun snorted and said, "I wanted Nongzhu to take over, but this guy has been running away. For this reason, he even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to the late stage of soul formation. He really wants to live a carefree life. Don't look down on Nongzhu. Nongzhu's talent for cultivation is not worse than Wen Lanfeng's, and it is even better. He only suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to prevent me from finding a reason to let him take over as the punishment commissioner. Does he think that I can't see through him? I guess after I leave, even if it is to protect himself, he will not take long to break through to the late stage of soul formation. That's good. You can have a helper." "Damn it. You win." Yu Qianqiu hated Nongzhu very much. In order to escape responsibility, he even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through. "Damn it. You set me up. No, I can't let him take advantage of me. Master." After careful consideration, I think Senior Nongzhu is more suitable to take charge of the demon region. Then he patted his chest and promised, Master, don't worry. Leave it to me. I have a way to make him accept the position of punishment commissioner. I will go to him now. No need. Bai Changchun stopped him coldly and looked outside the door. He said expressionlessly, he is destined to have a relationship with the demon region in this life. No matter how far he runs, he has to come back. Then he stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, Isn't it good to have a master at the late stage of soul formation to run errands for you? Yu Qianqiu felt wronged and said, That guy is very cunning. He often goes against me now. Once he breaks through to the late stage of soul formation, how can I order him around? You don't have to worry about that. Even if he pretends to be stupid, there will be someone who can order him around. Bai Changchun snorted and said, Does he think that he can live freely for the rest of his life without being in charge of the demon region? What a joke. What you owe me, you better pay me back. Yu Qianqiu looked at Bai Changchun suspiciously. It was the first time that he heard Bai Changchun say something like this. He seemed to smell a trace of conspiracy. He had a premonition that Nongzhu's life in the future would not be so easy. The old guy had obviously dug a trap for Nongzhu. A trap dug by the world's top master. Damn it. She would definitely be killed. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed when he thought that Nongzhu would be in trouble. But when he thought that he would have to shoulder more responsibilities, he couldn't be happy anymore. What a bitter life. Seeing his bitter face, Bai Changchun put down his hands behind his back and stretched out one hand. He opened his palm and showed a bunch of silver balls. He said calmly, If these things really have the effect you said, you can come to me if you really have any trouble that you can't solve. Of course, the premise is that I am still alive. Chapter 703. Haha. Master is the #1 expert in the world. No matter how mysterious the East Holy Land is, it's still in this world. Who can hurt Master? If there's any trouble, I'll definitely come to you. Yu Qianqiu answered bluntly, his face smiling like a chrysanthemum. Since Bai Changchun already knew about the golden bead, Yu Qianqiu also tactfully told Bai Changchun about the space of the golden bead, and gave him a lot of silver beads. His original idea was to take advantage of Bai Changchun's convenience to go to the East Holy Land, and find a chance to gain experience there. How could he forget that he could still invite this great master back if there was any trouble? My trump card is still there, I'm not afraid. The happy Yu Qianqiu was already imagining. If some people really went too far, when he invited Bai Changchun back, oh my god. That scene will definitely be very exciting, sweetheart. This guy was actually secretly looking forward to someone coming to the demon region to find trouble. But he was more or less worried that something would happen to Bai Changchun in the East Holy Land. The evil smile on his face betrayed his thoughts. Seeing him like this, Bai Changchun's face turned cold and he said in a low voice, Don't come to me if you can solve the problem yourself. Go out and call Ziyi here. I have something to talk to her alone. Seeing that the old guy was angry, Yu Qianqiu's heart trembled and his smile froze. He nodded and bowed and hurriedly ran out. Once out of the big house, his steps became leisurely again, and he walked calmly to the side of the 1,000 Miles Lake. The few people by the lake all noticed him and flashed over. Looking at his proud face, they didn't know what treasure he had picked up. Nongzhu touched her chin and was puzzled. Previously, in order to refuse the position of torture envoy, this guy fought with her so fiercely. Why did he look so relaxed now? Could it be that this cunning guy got rid of the position? Her man finally came out. Furong's eyes were smiling, more beautiful than the crescent moon at night. Ziyi asked with an envious face. Yu Qianqiu, Senior Bai talked to you alone for such a long time. Did he teach you something good again? She knew that Bai Changchun had always treated people coldly, and was a man of few words. It was simply unheard of for him to talk through the night like this. Yu Qianqiu acted like a vile person who had the upper hand. He pointed at Ziyi's beautiful nose and said, My master has something to say to you in private. Hurry up, don't make my master unhappy. Ziyi's mouth was wide open. She had never spoken to Elder Bai alone before, and now he actually summoned her. Ziyi was excited and nervous at the same time. She was at a loss of what to do. She stammered, Really? Oh, I I'll go now. Nongju rolled her eyes and looked at Ziyi hurriedly rushing to the big house and respectfully entering the door. Why was Ziyi's words more effective than her own master's? Yu Qianqiu strolled to the lakeside and began to do some broadcasted gymnastics exercises. He looked at the vast demon domain in the distance and was in a good mood. From today onwards, this is my territory. Nongju and Furong looked at each other. Then Nongju flashed over and pretended to accompany him to do chest stretching exercises. She asked casually, "That Yu Qianqiu? Why did your master call Ziyi in?" Without turning his head, Yu Qianqiu said, "How would I know? You can ask Ziyi later." Being rejected, Nongju was not angry. She said, "What did you say to old Bai? Why did you take so long to speak? What did they say? Tell me, and I'll see if I can give you some advice." Yu Qianqiu withdrew his arm and turned around to look at her. He asked, "Do you really want to know?" Nongju looked back at the direction of the big house guiltily and said in a low voice, "Don't worry. I just want to listen and give you some advice. I won't tell anyone. If you don't believe me, I can swear." Yu Qianqiu snorted and stared at him and said with a cold smile, "You're also too despicable. My master said that he had found out long ago that you suppressed your cultivation and didn't break through in order to avoid being a torture master. You are so boring. If you don't want to be a torture master, just give up. Why do you have to play tricks with your old friend? Touch your own conscience and tell me, how can you feel at ease?" The wind was blowing by the lake, and Nongju's heart was a little cold. Bai Changchun had found out long ago, but he didn't mention it. What was he up to? Thinking of Bai Changchun's means, every time he talked to her, he looked at her with a sneer in his heart. Nongju immediately shivered. Based on his character, he was really tolerant of her for so many years and didn't punish her. Nongju felt lucky and thanked Bai Changchun for his generosity, but she felt that something was wrong. She looked at the direction of the big house guiltily again and asked in a low voice, "Yu Qianqiu, don't fool me. You can't talk about me for so long, can you? What else? You know, there are some words that can't be said to you." Yu Qianqiu left after saying that, and went to flirt with Furong. Nongju pulled a long face. Not long after, Ziyi came out. She had a serious expression on her face. She walked over and looked at Yu Qianqiu firmly, as if saying, "I will support you." Yu Qianqiu was confused and didn't know what Bai Changchun had said to her. Nongju immediately went over with a smile and asked, "My dear apprentice, what did Senior Bai say to you? Come on, tell me, so that I can give you some advice." Ziyi's firm eyes softened and she pouted her mouth in grievance. "Master, I promised Senior Bai that I wouldn't tell anyone. Don't force me, okay?" Nongju's face was completely dark. The muscles on her face twitched for a while, but she still squeezed out a smile and said, "Haha, don't be angry, Z. I won't force you." In fact, behind the smile, two tightly clenched fists were making a muffled sound. Yu Qianqiu, that brat, did not say anything, but even his own disciple did not pay attention to him. However, he dared to wrong anyone, but he could not bear to wrong Ziyi. Thus, he could only let himself be wronged and sulk. Seeing this scene, Yu Qianqiu turned around and smiled, like a fox that had stolen a chicken. He was happy to see Nongju being defeated. "Nongju." By Changchun's voice, Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around, and saw that Bai Changchun had appeared here at some point in time. The expressions of the juniors became respectful. Nongju said with a gloomy face, "What's the matter?" Bai Changchun stared at him with a faint smile and said slowly, "We have known each other for many years. From today on, I'm afraid we have to separate." There was a touch of nostalgia in his tone. It was not easy to hear such a tone from Bai Changchun's mouth. Nongju was stunned, and his face returned to normal in an instant. All his anger disappeared. Of course, he knew what Bai Changchun's words meant. He was really going to leave for the place that he had never returned from since ancient times. The world's most powerful master for more than 1,000 years, the old friend that he had known for many years, was bidding farewell to him. The past was still vivid in his mind. Thinking back to the time when he traveled through space and time, the originally blurry memories and the things that he usually couldn't even remember suddenly appeared in front of his eyes as if it was only yesterday. He remembered that he had tricked him to come to the demon ghost region. But he had restrained the world's most powerful master for 1,000 years. He had shouldered the burden that belonged to him. He had let him down. He owed it to him. Senior Bai. Ziyi whimpered. Her eyes were red, and big drops of tears fell down. Her shoulders trembled, and she covered her mouth as she sobbed. She looked at the world's most powerful master with tears in her eyes. She thought about the place he was going to and that she would never see him again. She couldn't control her emotions. Although she had heard that Senior Bai would go to the East Holy Land one day, she didn't expect it to be so soon. Senior Bai had just told her personally. Furong was shocked. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she suddenly realized that the atmosphere was not right. Ziyi was crying, and there was a sense of separation between them. Nongzhu's lips were tightly shut, and she turned to look at the crying Ziyi. Obviously, she already knew. He put his hand on Ziyi's shoulder, stared at Bai Changchun, and said with a smile, "Old Baiyu." His voice was a little hoarse, and his throat was a little dry. He couldn't finish his words, and his face tightened. Yu Qianqiu, who knew what was going on, didn't feel anything, but the atmosphere made him feel uncomfortable. He stood at the side and scratched his head. Suddenly, he saw Furong's bewildered expression. He immediately pushed Furong lightly and said, "Master has always favored you. Quickly kowtow to Master." Furong's expression became more and more confused. She didn't know why she had to kowtow for no reason. However, she always listened to Yu Qianqiu's words unconditionally. She immediately knelt down and kowtowed to Bai Changchun. After 3 kowtows, Bai Changchun waved his hand, and Furong couldn't continue kowtowing anymore. She was lifted up by a gentle airflow without any resistance. Hibiscus looked at Yu Qianqiu as if she wanted to say something. Yu Qianqiu smiled at her, indicating that it was fine. Nongzhu, Shuntian Island might not be peaceful during this period of time. Bring Furong and Ziyi to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest for the time being. As for the rest, Yu Qianqiu will naturally arrange it. Bai Changchun said with a faint smile. Furong looked at Yu Qianqiu again, and revealed a puzzled expression, as if asking, "Why do you want me to leave?" Yu Qianqiu gave her a look, indicating that she should listen to him. Furong immediately didn't have any objections. "Old Bai, there's no need to be so anxious." Nongzhu looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, "If I leave, what will happen to him?" "Leave now, don't make me say more." Bai Changchun looked at the boundless 1,000-mile lake, and nodded slightly as he looked around. His usually cold face actually maintained a faint smile. Occasionally, a trace of reluctance and longing could be seen in his moving eyes, but it disappeared in a flash. After looking around, his expression suddenly became resolute, and his eyes suddenly looked towards the east. His bright and spirited eyes revealed an unswerving determination to pursue. Chapter 704. Nongzhu stood there for a long time with a complicated expression. Then, she walked away resolutely, threw out a ship-shaped flying celestial device, and jumped on it. Nongzhu stood at the bow of the ship with her back to Bai Changchun, motionless and silent. Yu Qianqiu sighed slightly and pushed Furong and Ziyi towards the flying celestial device. Furong was at a loss, while Ziyi kept looking back with tears in her eyes. After Yu Qianqiu half-forcibly put them on the celestial device, Ziyi finally couldn't help but kneel down. She leaned on the string of the ship and cried bitterly, "Senior Bai." No matter how sad Ziyi was crying, the celestial device flew into the sky with a whoosh. Nongzhu didn't look back from beginning to end. She didn't even say a word. She just stood straight at the bow of the ship and drove the celestial device towards the south. Yu Qianqiu quietly walked to Bai Changchun and said, "Master, they're gone." He was obviously talking nonsense. With Bai Changchun's cultivation, how could he not know that they're gone? Bai Changchun looked back at Yu Qianqiu expressionlessly and nodded. Yu Qianqiu took a few steps back, cupped his hands and bowed to him solemnly. When he straightened up again, the person in front of him had already disappeared. A black spot in the sky quickly disappeared towards the east. Shuntian Island suddenly became very quiet. Yu Qianqiu slowly turned around and looked around. The sun was still shining, the 1,000-mile lake was still sparkling, the wind was still blowing, and the grass and trees on the island were still lush and swaying gently. When his eyes fell on the big house in the center of the island, he stopped. The old man who had been sitting in the house for thousands of years had really left. This place belonged to him now. It was like a dream. He actually became the master of this place. What an incredible thing. He was now the 108th torture master of the demon ghost region. Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt suffocated. He suddenly turned to the east and shouted loudly, "Master!" His voice echoed in all directions. He suddenly ran to the lakeside, opened his arms and sang loudly towards the boundless 1,000-mile lake. The great river flows to the east. The stars in the sky join the Big Dipper. We're leaving just like that. You have it, I have it, we have it all. Seeing injustice on the road, he roared. When it's time to make a move, make a move. Rushing through the 9 prefectures. Hey, F***ck your mother. Before he could finish his song, he ended it with a curse. After singing, shouting and scolding, he finally felt a lot more comfortable in his heart. Yu Qianqiu began to calm down. He stood silently by the side of the 1,000-mile lake and gazed into the distance. The blush on his cheeks gradually faded away and returned to normal. On a tall magnolia tree not far away, pure white magnolia flowers bloomed all over the branches, bathing in the sunlight and gently swaying. Lady Mu, who was dressed in snow-white clothes, stood under the tree in a reserved manner. She looked even more delicate than Mulan, who was on the branch. Looking at the lonely silhouette by the lake, he hesitated for a long time before walking over. He came to the back of Yu Qianqiu and asked softly, "Mister, has the punishment envoy left? Will he come back?" His voice was trembling. She clearly saw what happened here just now. She saw what she shouldn't have seen, and heard what she shouldn't have heard. She used to be a demon king, so she was naturally more sensible than Hibiscus. Although she didn't know where Bai Chongqun was going, she vaguely guessed that he wouldn't come back. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly. His calm face, which was facing the 1,000-mile lake, instantly changed and became covered with a layer of frost. A majestic, gloomy, and terrifying aura instantly erupted from his upright body and directly enveloped Lady Mu. Endless coldness, endless despair, endless death. All kinds of extremely terrifying negative emotions directly impacted Lady Mu's body and mind. Lady Mu almost instantly lost her desire to live and was about to suffocate. Trembling all over, she directly knelt on the ground and swayed. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked at Yu Qianqiu with infinite fear. She had never imagined that the amiable Mr. Yu would be so terrifying. Just the powerful aura erupting from his body was terrifying enough to kill her. Just how terrifying was the cultivation he was concealing? She had never seen such a terrifying aura in her life. Today was the first time in her life that the man in front of her suddenly made her feel that he was even more terrifying than the Lord Torture Envoy. Yu Qianqiu slowly turned around and stared at Lady Mu, who was kneeling on the ground. He said indifferently with no expression on his face, "The Lord Torture Envoy has left. Do you have any ideas?" No. I was just asking. I was wrong. Sir, please spare my life. Lady Mu's face was pale, but she forced herself not to collapse and tried hard to reply. She knew that she had asked something she shouldn't have. If she didn't explain clearly, the man in front of her could take her life at any time. It would be as easy as killing an ant. She didn't need to doubt him at all. From today onwards, I am the new torture envoy of the demon domain. Yu Qianqiu turned around and faced the 1,000-mile lake again. With his back facing Lady Mu, he said, "Do you have any objections?" Lady Mu trembled and bowed with difficulty. I pay my respects to the Lord Torture Envoy." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly felt that the terrifying aura had suddenly become stronger. It was so strong that she didn't even have the slightest thought of resisting and directly fainted. When she woke up, she found that the sun was still high in the sky. Obviously, she hadn't fainted for long. She checked her physical condition and found that there was nothing wrong with her except for being a little weak. Obviously, the new Lord Torture Envoy had already spared her. She tilted her head and found that Yu Qianqiu was still standing by the lake. She immediately got up and knelt down. "Thank you, Lord Torture Envoy, for sparing my life. Lady Mu, you haven't given me a massage for a long time." Yu Qianqiu turned around and chuckled. Then he took off his clothes and jumped into the lake, swimming 2 rounds naked. Lady Mu was stunned. She couldn't get used to the Lord Torture Envoy's reaction. But she understood what he meant by a massage. She immediately walked to the lakeside and gently took off her clothes. In the blink of an eye, an alluring and delicate body appeared. She slowly walked into the lake, and with a wave of her hand, she smoothed out a half-exposed rock on the lake's surface. Yu Qianqiu turned around and swam back, lying directly on the rock. Half of his body was on the rock in the water, while the other half was exposed to the sun. Naked, Lady Mu leaned over and let him massage her slender fingers. She asked softly, "My lord, how's the strength?" Yu Qianqiu narrowed his eyes and grunted. He seemed to be enjoying it very much. His mind was filled with all sorts of nonsense. I don't have to be cautious in Shuntian Island anymore. I'm in charge of my territory, how great! His head, which was resting on his arms, tilted over and said, "When you're free, go find the Demon King and the Ghost King to get some fresh fruits. Use a little more strength." Yes. Lady Mu didn't show any abnormality on her face, but she was filled with caution and reverence in her heart. She was ready to sacrifice herself at any time, but Yu Qianqiu didn't seem to have any intention of touching her at all. After Bai Changchun left, the demon domain became someone's territory. Someone immediately turned the sky upside down and created an unprecedented scene in the demon domain. Sunbathing in the 1,000-mile lake and being massaged by beauties. Such a simple life. The big house in the center of the island silently watched the lively scene by the lake. The open door seemed to be letting out a soundless roar. In the territory of the Wuxia Empire, the flames of war reached the sky. Wherever Shi Wenguang pointed his sword, the army was invincible. The imperial army didn't even have the strength to fight back. The overwhelming victory made Shi Wenguang's army very spirited. They played a triumphant song all the way. They attacked cities and conquered territories as if they were taking something out of their pocket. And the territory they occupied kept expanding. The imperial court had long been in a panic. They forcefully recruited able-bodied men to replenish the army that was constantly losing in an attempt to protect the shrinking territory. However, the empire was on the verge of collapse, and the hearts of the people were changing. Who could turn the tide for the rotten regime? The various sects in the Wuxia cultivation world watched coldly from the sidelines. They were somewhat curious as to why the Fuxian Island hadn't taken any action yet. Could it be that they were just going to let the imperial power change in the secular world? When the news that Shi Wenguang's backer was Yu Qianqiu spread, the various sects came to a sudden realization. It was a critical moment. The Fuxian Island had no choice but to swallow their anger. For a moment, the Fuxian Island became the joke of the various sections. Back then, they had unceremoniously expelled Yu Qianqiu from the sect. Now they were finally going to drink the bitter wine that they brewed themselves. However, the attention of the various sects quickly shifted away from this matter. No one cared about the war in the secular world anymore. This was because a piece of news suddenly spread from the various countries. Moreover, it spread like wildfire. It was hard for the Wuxia cultivation world not to know about it. The #1 expert in the world, Bai Changchun, was going to enter the mysterious East Holy Land. Since the news had spread, the ins and outs of the matter were quickly investigated. The various sects in the Wuxia cultivation world finally understood that the #1 expert in the world was from Wuxia. Moreover, he had been secretly protecting Wuxia. Therefore, the soul formation experts of the various countries hadn't made a move yet. However, once Bai Changchun left, the various countries would definitely launch an all-out attack on the Wuxia cultivation world. For a moment, the various sects in Wuxia panicked. They knew that their good days were coming to an end. At this moment, the various countries were forcefully restraining their disciples. They strictly ordered them not to cause any trouble. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. This was because Bai Changchun's temper was very scary. At this critical moment of his departure, it was possible that he would swiftly reorganize the cultivation world by dealing with the aftermath. This was not just a rumor. It was very possible. Whenever something involved Bai Changchun, the commotion caused would make everyone tremble in fear for a long time. Therefore, no one wanted to provoke Bai Changchun at this moment. For a moment, the entire cultivation world had a rare peace. Everyone was polite and lived in harmony. However, there was also a place that was not peaceful. Within the borders of Lingfang Valley, all the disciples of Lingfang Valley, together with the thousands of Wen clan disciples that Wen Lanfeng brought, spent a few days searching back and forth within Lingfang Valley several times. They almost turned over every barren mountain and remote corner. However, to Lu Yanqing's disappointment, Xian Laosen and Yan Juixing, who had stolen the 7-star blood orchid, seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Not even a trace of them could be found. Chapter 705. In fact, both Lu Yanqing and Wen Lanfeng knew that Yan Juixing and Xian Laosen had probably escaped. Even if they didn't escape, they couldn't find them under such a large-scale search. The hope of finding them again was slim. However, Xian Laosen refused to give up. He led the disciples of Lingfang Valley and Wen family to continue searching frantically. Everyone could understand his feelings. 3 of his brothers had died, and one of them might even die. How could he not be anxious? At the peak of the herb hut, 2 figures stood in front of the cliff under the setting sun. One was tall, the other graceful. The lush Lingfang Valley was dyed with a layer of red and yellow by the setting sun. For the next few days, Lu Yanqing stood here most of the time, looking at the deserted Lingfang Valley with a frown. When Lanfeng sighed softly, "Yanqing, since it's already happened, let's get over it." The eldest, 2nd, 4th, 8th and 9th are all anxious. I'm useless as a master. I can't even protect the disciples under my nose. I'm sorry. If it wasn't for the eldest, 2nd, 4th and 8th going out to collect herbs recently, I'm afraid. Lu Yanqing shook her head in pain. When Lanfeng comforted her, "It's not your fault. Who knew that after Yan Juixing escaped from Cornucopia, he would hide in your Lingfang Valley? Otherwise, he would have attracted a group of people to hunt him down. How could we allow him to cause trouble here?" "No, it's all my fault," Lu Yanqing muttered to herself. "If I didn't stop Yu Qianqiu at Cornucopia, there wouldn't be today." Do you remember what Yu Qianqiu said at that time? He said, "You let the people of Ice Palace go today. If the people of Ice Palace hurt Lingfang Valley in the future, I hope you won't regret it." Ha! She looked back at Wen Lanfeng with a sad smile and said, "It's really a prophecy." Unfortunately, he was right. Wen Lanfeng, don't you think I deserve it? Wen Lanfeng was startled. "That's not true. Don't listen to that guy's nonsense." Speaking of Yu Qianqiu, Lu Yanqing seemed to have thought of something. Her self-reproachful expression became a little more restrained, and she said in a bleak tone, "I reckon that Lao San is no longer in the Lingfang Valley. Let your Wen family's disciples withdraw. Bai Changchun is about to leave, and many people are rushing to see him off. You should also go and see him off. Let's keep looking. If you don't look for it, then there's no hope of finding it." When Lanfeng tactfully refused. In fact, he also wanted to take this opportunity to accompany Lu Yanqing. Seeing that Lu Yanqing still wanted to persuade him, he couldn't help but smile and said, "Everyone knows what those people who are going to send Bai Changchun off are thinking. They just want to personally see Bai Changchun enter the eastern sacred lands, so that they can plan for the future. Otherwise, they won't be able to eat or sleep well. I won't join in the fun, lest Bai Changchun misunderstands." Lu Yanqing paused for a moment and nodded slightly. As the 2 of them chatted, they began to guess who would succeed as the Demon Realm's torture master. Under the night sky, in the vast land of Dirong Kingdom, there were undulating mountains. Some were steep, some were tall, and some were flat. Under the cover of the white snow, they had lost their edges and corners, forming a gentle and beautiful white curve. The bright moonlight reflected off the pure white snow, forming a silver light all over the mountains. This was a world of snow, and the cultivation world called this place the Great Snow Mountain. On the highest peak of the towering mountain, a majestic palace made of ice stood tall. Under the moonlight, the ice palace was sparkling, showing off its cold and poignant beauty on the peak of the mountain. And this seemingly cold ice palace, in fact, was loose on the outside but tense on the inside. The 6 disciples of Bing Chengzi were carefully watching the outside of the palace, and 3rd Xian was among them. Yan Bugui anxiously paced back and forth in the palace. He was able to come here thanks to the 2 disciples of Bing Chengzi, a group of disciples of the Ice Palace, and a group of old subordinates who risked their lives to escort him out of the limitless island. However, the moment he arrived here, he coincidentally saw Yan Juexing, who was personally escorted by Bing Chengzi. It was a good thing for a father and son to meet each other, but Yan Juexing's appearance really shocked Yan Bugui. His son looked haggard and had lost an arm, which instantly made Yan Bugui's heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. He had nothing now. His home was gone and the limitless island was gone. If his son was gone, he really didn't know where to go. Bing Chengzi had brought Yan Juexing into the secret room for 3 whole days, and there was no news at all. How could he not be anxious? Below the Ice Palace, in the secret room deep inside the mountain, it was covered by a soundproof enchantment. At this moment, inside the soundproof enchantment, the smell of blood was so strong that it was pungent, and there was an endless mournful scream, which made one's hair stand on end. Bing Chengzi looked at Yan Juexing, who was in a small blood pool in front of him with a solemn face. The one who was screaming was none other than Yan Juexing himself. Yan Juexing's naked body was soaked in the blood pool, and the blood had submerged up to his chest. He was crazily shaking his head and screaming in the blood pool. His face was hideous, and he seemed to be in extreme pain. At the place where one of his arms was cut off, more than half of his arm had already grown out. At the place where his arm was cut off, there were red granules wriggling disgustingly, like a pile of earthworms, which was disgusting to look at. He was using the blood demon body refining technique to regrow his lost arm. Even though Bing Chengzi had a firm mind, after listening to Yan Juexing's mournful scream for a whole day, he couldn't help but frown. However, for Yan Juexing's safety, he had to protect him personally. He really couldn't let any accidents happen to him. Speaking of which, he had to thank Bai Changchun for successfully saving Yan Juexing this time. If it wasn't for Bai Changchun going to the East Holy Land and keeping all the forces quiet, it would have been really difficult for him to successfully bring Yan Juexing back. After receiving the distress message from Yan Juexing, who was forced into a corner, he rushed over at top speed. Coincidentally, the Spirit Fang Valley was conducting a large-scale search of the mountain. The seriously injured Yan Juexing was hiding here and there, not knowing where to hide. Bing Chengzi's timely appearance resolved the crisis. With his profound cultivation, he quietly brought Yan Juexing back. In fact, Yan Juexing had to thank Third Xian for escaping capture. If it wasn't for Third Xian's familiarity with the terrain of the Spirit Fang Valley, and helping Yan Juexing hold on until Bing Chengzi arrived, he would still be in trouble. Speaking of which, Bing Chengzi still had to thank one person, and that was Wen Lanfeng. Fortunately, Wen Lanfeng only cared about Lu Yanqing and kept her company. If Wen Lanfeng had also participated in the search of the mountain, Bing Chengzi's movements would probably not have escaped Wen Lanfeng's notice. All these coincidences could only mean that Yan Juexing was not fated to die. A day later, the scream in the secret room disappeared. In the blood pool, Yan Juexing, who was covered in blood, opened his healthy arms and laughed wildly without concealment. After calming down, Yan Juexing bowed to Bing Chengzi and said, "Thank you for saving me, master. Otherwise, Juexing would not have been able to escape. You should have used the protective jade pendant I gave you earlier. Why did you have to use it only when you had no other choice?" Bing Chengzi casually scolded him and did not say much. But then he slightly frowned and said, "Your cultivation? Why did it drop?" Although the blood demon body refining technique has the magical function of reattaching broken limbs, it also causes great damage to the cultivation. It is expected that my cultivation would drop from the middle stage of crossing calamity to the early stage. But I hate it. If it wasn't for Yu Qianqiu, how could I do this? Yan Juexing suddenly opened his arms and roared madly, "Yu Qianqiu, I will not let you go." Unfortunately, Yu Qianqiu could not hear this sentence. Otherwise, he would definitely jump up and say, "Who's afraid of who?" Because he did not expect Yan Juexing to let him go. Since they were sworn enemies, he would continue to fight to the death. In the big house of the demon ghost region, Yu Qianqiu was lying on the ground, but there was an elastic thigh under his head, which belonged to Miss Mu. At this time, Miss Mu was carrying a plate of red fruits, picking them one by one and sending them to Yu Qianqiu's mouth. The latter smacked his lips a few times, waved his hand to stop the hands that continued to send him red fruits, and got up with a sigh. He leaned against the door frame weakly, spat out the fruit skin, and looked around aimlessly. He was really bored out of his wits. He had no choice. Although there were beauties serving him and his life was comfortable, there were only 2 people on the island. After a few days, he found that he was bored out of his mind. As a new official, he also wanted to guard the demon ghost region majestically like Bai Changchun, and have a taste of being a torture envoy. But now he found that it was a mistake to learn from Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun could stay here year after year, but he found that he lost his patience after only a few days. How was this different from being in jail? In jail, many of his cellmates would brag, but Miss Mu was not one to brag. I wonder if Master has left. Yu Qianqiu leaned against the door frame like a resentful woman, and muttered to himself. Then disappeared. Teleportation. Miss Mu's expression turned serious. The new torture envoy had indeed concealed his cultivation on purpose. He was not as superficial as he usually appeared, but had hidden his strength well. In the vast East Sea, there was an island named Xianxian. It was the territory of Nanming Ancestor, one of the 4 great men of the cultivation world. It was shrouded in smoke all year round, and the red light shone without end, and the sound of knocking could be heard. On the main peak of Xianxian Island, Bai Changchun, dressed in a green robe, stood alone with his hands behind his back. His eyes were slightly closed on his thin face. He was waiting quietly, waiting for the opening of the East Holy Land. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and slowly turned around. He frowned and said, "What are you doing here?" A person suddenly appeared behind him. At this moment, he was frozen on the spot like a fossil, not moving at all. Even his eyeballs could not move. This person was none other than Yu Qianqiu. After finding his master's location, he had just appeared, and before he could react, he immediately discovered that the surrounding air currents had suddenly moved. They pressed down on him like metal, making him unable to move. He did not even have a chance to resist. This was because Bai Changchun had discovered it early. Otherwise, if someone had suddenly appeared behind him, and he did not stop in time, Yu Qianqiu might have become a meat patty. The air currents that clamped down on him loosened, and Yu Qianqiu regained his freedom. He quickly panted and said, "Master, I'm here to send you off. Why did you attack me?" He was full of resentment, and it felt like his kindness was taken as malicious intent. However, he did not think about it. In this world, who could get close to Bai Changchun without being discovered? He had suddenly appeared out of thin air in Utopia, and got close to Bai Changchun. Thus, Bai Changchun had subconsciously treated him as an expert and reacted immediately. Luckily, he had stopped in time and did not cause any mishaps. Bai Changchun had never wasted his breath on such topics, and he could not be bothered to explain to him. He asked expressionlessly, "Is this the miraculous effect you mentioned when you gave me those silver balls?" Chapter 706. Yes, Master. Yu Qianqiu's face was full of pride, as if he was asking, "Awesome, right?" Bai Changchun nodded slightly and turned around expressionlessly, as if he had no interest in this kind of thing. This immediately dampened Yu Qianqiu's enthusiasm. If anyone knew that the golden bead had such a magical function, wouldn't they ask until the very end? Who would be as indifferent as him? Whoosh whoosh. A gust of wind from the south suddenly blew, and the hazy red fog that enveloped the island slowly drifted to the north. Yu Qianqiu stood behind Bai Changchun and looked around. The fog dispersed. His vision gradually became clear, and the appearance of the entire Xianxian island appeared in front of him. "Master, is this Xianxian island?" Yu Qianqiu looked around and asked. Bai Changchun softly replied with a "hmm." Suddenly Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank. Bai Changchun was facing the east, and there was a vast expanse of white fog. It was boundless, and it was connected to the sea and the sky. No one knew how big the area was. Compared to this boundless sea of fog, Xianxian Island was probably not even a small place. The two were separated by the sea, and the distance between them might be less than 10 miles. The wind blew away the surrounding fog, but it couldn't blow away the vast sea of fog in front of it. It was ethereal, serene, and mysterious. "That is the East Holy Land?" Yu Qianqiu murmured. Bai Changchun once again replied with a and looked down the mountain. Yu Qianqiu subconsciously followed his gaze and saw two figures rushing over. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the top of the mountain. When one of them saw Yu Qianqiu, he and Yu Qianqiu spoke at the same time. Why are you here? This person was none other than Nongzhu. After he made arrangements for Zi and Furong, he immediately rushed over here. However, after the two of them asked, they didn't reply and turned their heads to the side like enemies. The man standing next to Nongzhu was sizing up Yu Qianqiu, and Yu Qianqiu was also attracted by his weird costume. It was a tall, barefooted old man. His face was old, but his body was muscular and his skin was bronze. His face was full of whiskers, each strand of hair standing straight up like a hedgehog. What was even more spectacular was that his hair, beard, and eyebrows were all crimson red. He was only wearing a pair of large underpants, and the underpants were also red. He had the appearance of a strange person. The old man opened his big eyes and looked at Yu Qianqiu curiously. Nongzhu, who is this? I don't think I've seen him before. He looks unfamiliar. He found it strange. There were only a handful of people in the world who were qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun and speak. Furthermore, this person looked so young, and he immediately suspected that he was Bai Changchun's disciple. Nongzhu chuckled and said, Old man Nanming, take a guess. His words immediately confirmed Yu Qianqiu's guess. He immediately bowed and said, Junior Yu Qianqiu greets Nanming ancestor. Nanming ancestor was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed and said, I knew it. No wonder you're Bai Changchun's disciple. No wonder you could break into Xianxian Island without being discovered. I was reckless. Yu Qianqiu was unusually humble. Nanming ancestor waved his hand and said, It's all right, it's all right. I've long heard of your name. Now that I've seen you today, you really live up to your reputation. He was a little tired. Why couldn't he see through his cultivation? Nongzhu also felt that it was a little strange. With Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, he shouldn't be able to hide from the protection of Xianxian Island, right? Nanming ancestor was a straightforward person. He couldn't figure it out, so he couldn't help but ask, Yu Qianqiu, what's your cultivation? I'm a little clumsy to not be able to see through your cultivation. Nongzhu chuckled and thought, it would be strange if you could see through it. Even Bai Changchun couldn't see through it. Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes at him. He then took out a porcelain bottle from his storage bag and respectfully gave it to Nanming ancestor. He said, I've just arrived here, so I didn't prepare anything because I came in a hurry. Here is a bottle of breath-concealing pill that I personally refined. After taking one, you can hide your cultivation for 10 days. I have no respect for you. It's just a breath-concealing pill, so please accept it. Nanming ancestor revealed an expression of understanding. At the same time, he was very satisfied with this kid who gave him a gift as soon as he met him. He then reached out to take it and said, Then I won't stand on ceremony. If you have time, come to Xianxian Island to play. Although breath-concealing pill wasn't a miraculous pill, it was a rare item that had long been lost. With a bottle in hand, it might come in handy in the future. Naturally, he had to accept it. Nongzhu, who was at the side, was unhappy. She pulled a long face and said in a deep voice, You promised to give me a bottle, but you haven't given it to me yet. Are you going to drag it until… Before he could finish, Yu Qianqiu threw a porcelain bottle at him and stopped him from talking nonsense. Nanming ancestor raised his red eyebrows. He could tell that these two guys didn't get along. Coincidentally, he and Nongzhu didn't get along well either. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. He immediately laughed and patted Yu Qianqiu's shoulder praising, Not bad, not bad. Half of Yu Qianqiu's body trembled from the slap, but he still squeezed out an awkward smile and said, Senior, you flatter me, you flatter me. Bai Changchun quietly faced the vast sea of fog, turning a deaf ear to the conversation between the three. 100 miles away from Xianxian Island, there were more than 10 large flying artifacts floating in the sky and sea. These flying magic tools were all soul formation stage lords from various countries. There were more than 100 of them, and they were all gathered together in their respective circles. For example, Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan, and Ouyangda were all there. The blue sky and white clouds floated, and the blue sea surged. The scenery was really good. However, everyone's attention wasn't on this. Most of the time, they were focused on the vast sea of fog between the blue sea and blue sky. However, they didn't see any movement until now. Ouyangda, who was standing side by side with Pei Fong and Qi Jujuan, suddenly turned around and walked away. He flicked his sleeves and said, "When is this damn East Holy Land going to open? We've waited for more than 10 days. Why is there still no movement?" Pei Fong squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. He hugged his stomach and laughed. "Old Ouyang, don't be impatient. Isn't Bai Changchun already at Xianxian Island? Since he's here, it means that the East Holy Land is going to open soon." Qi Jujuan turned around expressionlessly and said, "We've already waited for so many years. Why would we care about waiting for a few more days?" He had always been like this. No matter what, there was almost no expression on his face. Although the three of them had been together for a long time, their temperaments and personalities had never been affected by one another. Pei Fong always had a smile on his face. The other two didn't talk much, but Ouyangda's temper was a little fiery, and Qi Jujuan's thoughts were always hard to guess. He was always cold and calm. There was no one else on the flying artifact that the three demigod final stage experts were on. Under normal circumstances, there weren't many people qualified to stand with them. If they weren't summoned by them, how many people would be able to participate in the conversation between the three of them? The former top 10 experts were now incomplete. Of course, Bai Changchun was an exception, because the situation was just the opposite. It wasn't that Bai Changchun wasn't qualified to talk to the three of them, but the three of them weren't qualified to talk to Bai Changchun. As for the others, when Lanfeng and Bing Qingzi didn't come, the one who came, Hu Changshou, was standing with a group of demigod mid-stage lords with a gloomy face. However, he didn't seem to have anything in common with them, so it was very awkward. Haha. Look at how ugly Hu Changshou's face is. Pei Fong glanced at them and laughed. The other two looked over as well, and they snorted disdainfully at this moment. The 100 or so spirit-severing lords all turned around to look at the source of the voice. They saw a dense group of flying artifacts coming from behind. Everyone looked at each other. Someone asked curiously, "Why are there so many people? Who's here to join in the fun?" Everyone was confused. Obviously, they didn't know. However, when those flying artifacts got closer, the demigod lords were speechless. There were at least 300 to 400 flying artifacts, and the cultivation of the people standing on them was too low for them to look at. The highest cultivation was at the end of the tribulation passing stage, and there were many at the tribulation passing stage. There were also many at the nascent soul stage. Everyone looked at each other and asked each other which sect they were from, but they all shook their heads, indicating that they didn't know them. Suddenly, someone said in surprise, "Look at their clothes. They seem to be from the Wuxia cultivation world." On one of the artifacts, Yunantian, who was dressed in a snow-white fluffy robe, walked to the back of the ship and asked indifferently, "Who are you? Come forward and answer me." Although his voice was soft, it penetrated the group of people who were dozens of meters away. Those people seemed to stop when they saw the people here. They all looked surprised because no one could see the cultivation of any of the people on the flying artifacts in front of them. When they heard the question, they gathered again. When they were about 10 meters away, a flying artifact appeared with 5 to 6 people on it. It was the people from Fuxian Island. Feng Xiangtian walked to the front of the ship and forced himself to calm down. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. I'm here to send off Senior Bai. May I know who you are?" He had already vaguely guessed who these people were. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid, but he was the sect leader of the number 1 sect in Wuxia. How could he show weakness in front of everyone? As soon as he finished speaking, the lords of the various countries burst into laughter, all of them shaking their heads with mocking expressions. The hundreds of people didn't care about the thousands of people standing in front of them at all. Someone even insulted. They really don't know what's good for them. How dare they come here to die? The elegant Yunantian looked back at the person who spoke and realized that it was Yanji from Xiushui country. He sneered, "Yanji, if you really have the ability, why don't you go out and kill them all now? It's a piece of cake to kill them." Yanji was suddenly stunned. Then he flew into a rage and said, Yunantian, what do you mean? Yunantian said with a faint smile, I don't mean anything. I just want to fulfill your wish. If you don't dare to, don't say such shameless words. Yanji wanted to say something but was stopped by Hua Zongming and the others. Bai Changchun hadn't left yet. If Yanji started killing the people of Wuxia cultivation world now, Bai Changchun would probably start killing soon. Chapter 707. Yunantian ignored Yanji and turned to Feng Xiangtian with a smile. So you're Wuxia cultivators, please go ahead. He didn't introduce himself and everyone else, as he didn't want to waste time talking. After all, the difference in cultivation was too big. The so-called supporting Immortal Island sect leader wasn't even worth mentioning in his eyes. But then again, with his identity, he was already very cultured to speak so politely to Feng Xiangtian. Although he didn't say everyone's identity, Feng Xiangtian and the others already knew. Especially when the two of them were arguing just now. Yunantian and Yanji's names made the Wuxia cultivators' hearts jump. These were the names of the Soul Formation Realm lords of the various countries. Then I won't disturb you all. Feng Xiangtian didn't dare to show any temper. He cupped his hands at Yunantian and the others respectfully. He led the group of people and turned, wanting to go around these terrifying people. The various countries' lords looked at these Wuxia cultivators who were trembling like chickens and sneered. It wasn't convenient to touch them now, but once Bai Changchun went to the East Holy Land, these people would undoubtedly be lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They wouldn't be able to run even if they wanted to. Hua Zongming, who was holding Yanji, looked at the Wuxia cultivators floating away in front of him expressionlessly. However, his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw that there were several women standing on one of the flying artifacts. One of them was a woman dressed in white. She was a rare beauty in this world. He couldn't help but shout, Stop. The various countries' lords all looked at Hua Zongming. Yanji, who was beside him, was even more confused. This guy told him that now wasn't the time to cause trouble, so why did he start again? The Wuxia cultivators all stopped in fear. The leading flying artifact from supporting Immortal Island floated back. Feng Xiangtian braced himself and asked Hua Zongming, May I know what advice this senior has for us? He had no choice but to stand up for Hua Zongming. After all, he was the sect master of the number 1 sect. Hua Zongming, who was wearing light yellow thin clothes and barefooted, waved his hand in an elegant manner and said, It's none of your business. His eyes were fixed on the beautiful woman in the crowd. Everyone followed his gaze and suddenly came to a realization. He must have seen a stunning beauty. No wonder. It must be known that Hua Zongming was a person who was famous for his love for beauties. His great light palace was called a den of lust behind his back because he kept many beautiful women. It wasn't hard to guess what he liked by looking at his clothes that didn't fit his style. In fact, it wasn't just Hua Zongming. Many people's eyes lit up when they saw that woman. That woman was none other than the leader of the Moon Clan, Chionghua Fairy. She was famous for her looks in the cultivation world of Wuxia. This was also because Bai Hua Fairy wasn't here, otherwise a pair of beauties would definitely be a feast for the eyes. Jade Flower Fairy's expression changed slightly. She naturally noticed Hua Zongming's lecherous gaze, and he was not the only one. Although she was angry, she was even more terrified because she couldn't afford to offend anyone here. He could only tilt his head to the side and pretend that he didn't see anything. The reason why the Wuxia cultivators were here was naturally because they heard that Bai Changchun was going to the Eastern Holy Land. Therefore, the leaders of the various sects contacted each other and came together to see him off, to thank Bai Changchun for protecting the Wuxia cultivation world for so many years. Of course, this was just a nice thing to say. The main reason was that every torture master of the Ghost region was a top expert who could shake the cultivation world. The next torture master would probably be no worse. The hundreds of sect leaders had come here and put on such a grand show because they wanted to show respect to Senior Bai. Or rather, they wanted to play the pity card, hoping that Senior Bai could speak to the next enforcer and continue to protect the world of cultivators in Wuxia. According to their thinking, since Bai Changchun could take care of the Wuxia cultivation world for so many years, It was obvious that he had deep feelings for the Wuxia cultivation world. They believed that if they came together to beg him, he wouldn't really ignore them. Therefore, this scene happened. However, their thinking was just wishful thinking. Bai Changchun didn't take care of the Wuxia cultivation world like they thought. First of all, when they saw Bai Changchun later, it was still uncertain whether he would talk to them or not. Second, once Bai Changchun left, it would be difficult for them to leave this place safely. Jade Flower Fairy had just turned her head to one side when a white figure suddenly appeared in front of her. She was a little surprised, but then she saw clearly who it was. It was the elegant man in a fluffy white robe who talked to Feng Xiangtian just now. He was looking at her deeply. Jade Flower Fairy was suddenly at a loss. She couldn't scold him, let alone beat him. "Sorry to disturb you, Fairy." Yunantian bowed politely and said, "I am Yunantian, the Lord of Lu Nangua. It is my honor to meet you today. I wonder if I have the honor to know your name?" Jade Flower Fairy bit her lips and bowed. "I am Jade Flower, the leader of the Moon Clan. Nice to meet you, Senior." Hua Zongming's face darkened. He didn't expect that Yunantian would take advantage of him after he stopped these people. Among the lords, many people were already snickering. They all knew that Yunantian was not a good guy. There was a reason why he only accepted female disciples in his clan. Those who knew the truth all knew that the relationship between Yunantian and the female disciples he accepted was not clear. It was just that, apart from cultivators at the last stage of the semi-god realm, Yunantian's cultivation was considered high compared to the other lords. Everyone gave him some face and few people talked nonsense. Haha, Yunantian really doesn't change. Pei Fong smiled at Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangda, who were beside him. He then shouted loudly, "Brother Yu, calm down for the time being. If there is anything, we can talk about it later. Please come over and have a chat." He did not want Yunantian to cause any trouble now, lest everyone was implicated. Yunantian glanced at Pei Fong and bowed to Jade Flower Fairy. "Oh, the famous Jade Flower Fairy. Nice to meet you. I will talk to you again when I have the chance." After that, he stepped back and teleported to the flying ritual implement where Pei Fong was. He glared at Pei Fong and said grumpily, "What's the matter?" Pei Fong shouted to the people of the Wuxia cultivation world, "Let's go. Don't make trouble for yourselves." As soon as he spoke, no one stopped the Wuxia cultivators. A group of people quickly flew away. At this time, Pei Fong turned to Yunantian and said with a smile, "Brother Yu, in terms of appearance, who in the world can compare to Lu Yanqing?" As soon as these words came out, many people couldn't help but burst into laughter. Everyone knew that Yunantian had once pursued Lu Yanqing. Unfortunately, he was beaten up by his rival in love, Wen Lanfeng, and almost lost his life. From then on, Yunantian didn't dare to provoke Lu Yanqing anymore. Pei Fong was obviously exposing his shortcomings. Yunantian snorted coldly and flashed back to his original position. At this moment, everyone's laughter stopped abruptly and they looked around. The whistling sound of the wind gradually became louder, and the blowing sea breeze suddenly became stronger. The strange thing was that this wind wasn't from the north, south, east, or west. It was a little messy, and it became more and more vigorous. When it blew on their faces, it felt like something was slapping their faces. The blue sea below lost its rhythm and gradually became turbulent. Just as everyone was looking at each other in dismay, they suddenly heard the faint rumbling of thunder coming from all around them. Everyone quickly looked around and saw dark clouds coming from the horizon. They came from all directions and seemed to be gathering in this direction. Under the dark clouds, ferocious thunderbolts, dragons, snakes, and flood dragons were shining brightly. They connected the sea and the dark clouds in the sky, and were moving quickly. The wind became stronger, and was close to a storm. The sea was completely angry and set off monstrous waves. "The East Holy Land is about to open," Pei Fong said with a smile on his face. What he meant was that Bai Changchun was finally leaving. Ouyangda and Qi Jiujuan nodded slightly. Many people present had seen the opening of the East Holy Land. They all understood that this was a sign of the opening of the East Holy Land. However, none of the Wuxia cultivators had seen it before. Just as they were dozens of miles away from the feudal lords, They suddenly saw such a change in the sky and sea. All of them looked around in bewilderment. The fog that had just shrouded Xianxian Island was blown away again. Bai Changchun, who was standing on the peak of the mountain, slowly opened his eyes and looked around with radiance. Nongzhu looked at the dark clouds in the sky and muttered to herself, "Is it going to open soon?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded solemnly and said, "Soon." He had lived on Xianxian Island for such a long time, and had seen the opening of the East Holy Land several times. What he said was naturally correct. When Yu Qianqiu heard this, he looked around curiously. He wanted to see how the Holy Land of the East would be opened. Right at this moment, the thunderbolts in the surrounding dark clouds suddenly disappeared at the same time. The wind between heaven and earth swept wildly, and the surrounding dark clouds quickly gathered together. In less than an hour, the entire sky above Xianxian Island was covered by dark clouds. The last ray of light disappeared, and the world was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Not long after, thunder rumbled in the sky again, and it was getting more and more intense. The dark clouds in the sky flickered, as if they were brewing something. Suddenly, an intense and dazzling thunderbolt pierced through the dark clouds like a long sword and illuminated the entire world. The dark sky was shrouded by the rolling dark clouds, and the turbulent sea reflected the strong light. Then a loud bang was heard. It was so loud that even the ground could feel the strong tremors. Yu Qianqiu gritted his teeth and felt that he couldn't hear anything. However, his eyes were still wide open as he looked at the place where the thunderbolt struck. It was the clouds that shrouded the East Holy Land no matter how strong the wind was. In the instant that the huge thunderbolt disappeared into the clouds, the world returned to darkness. However, Yu Qianqiu could faintly see that the moment the light disappeared, the unmoving clouds seemed to move. Chapter 708. Bang! With a loud explosion, another huge thunderbolt appeared in the dark clouds. The direction it struck was exactly where the previous thunderbolt struck. With the help of the strong light, one could see that the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land, which could not be blown away by the wind, were slowly surging. Before the dazzling light disappeared, another shocking thunderbolt struck at the same location. Once the three thunderbolts appeared, it was as if a fuse had been lit. In an instant, the sky was filled with lightning and thunder. Densely packed green electric snakes flashed in the dark clouds and interweaved like a net. The scene was extremely shocking. Under the lightning, Xianxian Island was completely lit up. The surrounding sea surface was filled with billowing green light. At this moment, the dark clouds in the sky shouldn't be called dark clouds, but lightning clouds. They were formed by dense lightning. Countless densely packed lightning bolts shot towards the sky above Xianxian Island and converged into a gigantic thunderbolt. Bang! Once again, the target was the same as the previous three lightning bolts. Yu Qianqiu's eyes widened as he personally saw the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land rotating slowly. Suddenly, as if the speed of rotation was too slow, earth-shattering explosions resounded. Countless lightning snakes gathered to form huge thunderbolts. They crazily struck out one after another. More and more of them appeared, and the frequency of the strikes also became denser and denser. This scene reminded Yu Qianqiu of a dozen heavy machine guns bombarding the same target. Other than the continuous loud explosion, nothing else could be heard. The dark clouds had turned into a world of thunder and lightning. The lightning shot out wildly, and everywhere was covered in a vast expanse of green. The four people on the main peak of Xianxian Island could clearly feel the entire mountain beneath their feet shaking. Rocks of all sizes on the mountain were rolling down the mountain. This was because they were not ordinary people. Their cultivation was not weak, and they could circulate their energy to resist the tremors. If it was an ordinary person, they would have died from the tremors. Yu Qianqiu, whose cultivation was inferior, had already used his fingers to block his ears. Otherwise, he would not have been able to bear it. Even so, he still felt a little dizzy. He felt that his surroundings were filled with electromagnetism. All the hair on his body stood on end, as if there was an electric current flowing on the surface of his body. Although the Wuxia cultivators who were dozens of kilometers away were already very far away, they could still imagine the shocking scene in that place. All of them were dumbfounded as they looked at the shocking scene in the distance. Suddenly, someone noticed that hundreds of figures were flying towards the place where the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The lords of the various countries had already kept their flying artifacts, and were flying over quickly. They gathered at a spot several miles away from Xianxian Island, and hovered in the air, looking at the might of the world before them. Even though this was not the first time they had seen it, they still felt their hearts tremble. In that instant, they felt how insignificant they were. In the face of the might of heaven and earth, no matter how high his cultivation was, he was nothing more than an ant in this world. The continuous thunderbolts continued for nearly an hour before they finally calmed down. The wind between the sea and the sky was getting fiercer and fiercer. That was because a huge whirlpool had formed in the sky where the lightning struck. It produced a powerful suction force and stirred up the surrounding airflow. Bai Changchun, Grandmaster Nanming, and Nongzhu were like nails nailed to the mountain peak, not moving an inch. On the other hand, Yu Qianqiu was dumbfounded. He could not withstand it with his cultivation. He lost his center of gravity due to the strong wind. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and he felt like he was about to float away with the wind. Nongzhu looked at his bewildered expression and laughed sinisterly. At this moment, Grandmaster Nanming's bear-like palm pressed on Yu Qianqiu's shoulder. A warm current flowed into Yu Qianqiu's body, and he immediately stood firmly on the spot like a stake. Yu Qianqiu finally relaxed and could enjoy the scenery with peace of mind. The dense lightning and the dark clouds gradually died out, and the last ray of light between the heavens and the earth disappeared as well. Once again, they were plunged into complete darkness. All that was left in the surroundings was the strong wind blowing ceaselessly. However, Yu Qianqiu could clearly feel that the strong wind was slowly rising into the sky. The sound of the surging waves seemed to be gradually calming down, and it was no longer as impatient. At this moment, Grandmaster Nanming withdrew his palm from Yu Qianqiu's shoulder. Yu Qianqiu stretched out his hand to feel up and down in the darkness. The wind was indeed much weaker, and the whistling sound reached the sky. Ouch! Yu Qianqiu cried out in pain. In the darkness, Nongzhu said angrily, Yu Qianqiu, is there something wrong with you? How dare you touch my butt? Yu Qianqiu hurriedly explained. Don't misunderstand, I don't have that kind of hobby. I really didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind, and I accidentally touched you. Amidst their whispers, Grandmaster Nanming's laughter could be heard. Wah! Old man Nanming! Nongzhu screamed as her but was pinched by someone. Don't misunderstand. I didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind. Grandmaster Nanming snickered. Amidst the crackling noises, Nanming ancestors' blood-curdling screams could be heard. Nongzhu roared in anger. King feel the wind. Is it something you pinch with your hands? Yu Qianqiu quickly moved away to avoid being affected by the two people. Not long after, a bright white light appeared in the surrounding horizon, and it was expanding rapidly. The dark clouds in the sky were shrinking rapidly. In less than an hour, light once again shone on this part of the sea. The eastern sacred land was originally shrouded in white fog, but now a black whirlpool appeared in the sky. It sucked in the dark clouds that were as thick as ink, like a tornado pillar. The area of the dark clouds in the sky became smaller and smaller, and they were gradually swallowed by the black whirlpool. After a while, the last piece of dark cloud was sucked in by the whirlpool. The sky returned to being bright and sunny, and the blue waves of the sea rippled normally. The only difference was that above the eastern sacred land, in the whirlpool that was dozens of meters wide, a dense electric web suddenly appeared. It was like a huge beast opening its fangs to devour. After more than 300 years, the eastern sacred land has finally opened. Grandmaster Nanming let out a long sigh. Yu Qianqiu turned his head, and saw that his red hair and red beard had become messy as if someone had pulled them. Needless to say, it was definitely done by the furious Nongzhu. There were also many footprints on the buttocks of his red underpants. He reckoned that Nongzhu had something to do with them. Yu Qianqiu didn't have the mood to pay too much attention to this. He looked at the whirlpool that gathered lightning and said in a daze, "This whirlpool is the entrance to the eastern sacred land?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded and said, "That's right. An entrance with no exit can only be maintained for a period of time. After 6 hours, it will automatically close and return to normal." If you want to enter again, you have to wait for the next opening in 300 years. The three of them looked at Bai Changchun at the same time. They saw Bai Changchun, who was standing with his hands behind his back, slowly turn around and stare behind him expressionlessly. The three of them followed his gaze and immediately noticed the group of people several miles away. The cultivation of that group of people wasn't weak. They immediately noticed Bai Changchun looking at them, and they looked at each other guiltily. Pei Fong's fat face twitched, and he smiled awkwardly at the crowd. Bai Changchun is leaving, let's send him off. With him in the lead, more than 100 people quickly flew over. The space at the top of the main peak was limited, and it couldn't accommodate more than 100 people. Furthermore, they didn't dare to stand together with Bai Changchun, so they all landed at the foot of the main peak. All of them sneaked glances at Bai Changchun, but to their surprise, they realized that Yu Qianqiu was actually standing next to Bai Changchun. Grandmaster Nanming and Nongzhu were still acceptable, but that guy had such a big responsibility. What right did he have to stand next to Bai Changchun? Yu Qianqiu stared at the group of soul-forming experts below him, and he felt very pleased. The feeling of looking down at a group of soul-forming experts from a high position was very, very satisfying. Pei Fong cupped his broken palm and said with a smile, "We learned that Brother Bai is leaving, so we specially came to send you off. Nanming Nongzhu, you're here too. Yo, Brother Yu Qianqiu is here too." Bai Changchun's sharp gaze swept across the people below, and finally, he stared at Pei Fong. He said lightly, "Pei Fong, are you the leader?" His indifferent words immediately scared Pei Fong so much that cold sweat broke out on his back. There were too many meanings in his words, and it was easy for people to misunderstand. Pei Fong's expression changed, and he immediately waved his hand and said, No, we all agreed to come together. We thought that you were going to leave, so we all thought that we should send you off." As he said this, he turned around and asked the people behind him, "What do you think, everyone?" Yes. We should send him off." The group of people replied meekly. None of them dared to raise their voices. Looking at the situation, the people standing at the front couldn't wait to shrink back even more. Now this was majestic. He could scare a group of soul-forming experts like grandchildren. Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up, and he looked at Bai Changchun with great admiration. Nongzhu and ancestor of Nanming looked at each other and shook their heads slightly. Bai Changchun's despotic power had suppressed everyone for too long, causing everyone to be afraid to the bone. One wrong look from him could immediately make a group of people tremble with fear. "In that case, should I thank you for your kindness?" Bai Changchun asked lightly. No need. Pei Fong squeezed out a smile on his fat face, and he waved his hand repeatedly and said, "We've all been in the cultivation world for so many years. It's only right for us to send you off, it's only right." At this moment, Bai Changchun suddenly looked far away. Everyone followed his gaze, and saw a group of densely packed flying artifacts carrying a group of people flying over quickly. It was the group of people from the cultivation world of Wuxia. Led by Feng Xiangtian of Fuxian Island, hundreds of sect masters gathered. The closer they got to Xian Island, the faster their hearts beat. The legendary #1 expert in the world should be in front, but no one had seen him before. When everyone got closer and saw the group of lords on the main peak, they couldn't help but look at the four people standing on the peak. To be able to make the lords of the soul-forming realm submit to them, they were naturally extraordinary. Among them, there must be the legendary #1 expert in the world. Chapter 709. Yu Qianqiu was slightly stunned. There were many familiar faces among this group of people from Wuxia. He muttered to himself, "Why are these people here to join in the fun? This isn't a place for you to join in the fun. You can't afford to play." A group of flying artifacts stopped tens of meters away. The feudal lords standing on the second peak stared at these people coldly. The Wuxia cultivators sized up the four people standing on the peak anxiously. Many of them were stunned, because one of them was very eye-catching. It was hard not to recognize him. The group of people was speechless. Why is Yu Qianqiu here? Moreover, he was standing high above the feudal lords. Not to mention them, even the feudal lords were puzzled when they saw Yu Qianqiu here. Although the Wuxia cultivators didn't recognize Bai Changchun, the temperament of the four people was obvious. There was no need to mention Yu Qianqiu. The red-haired, red-bearded, bare-chested old man and the handsome middle-aged man didn't match the image of the world's #1 expert in the legends. Only the green-robed old man had a thin face, and his eyes were filled with a supercilious indifference. He stood there motionlessly, yet he gave off a feeling that he was one with the world. He was probably the #1 person in the world in the legends. Yu Qianqiu stared coldly at Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. He sneered and said, "Sect leader Feng, it's been a long time. I wonder why you're here?" Feng Xiangtian was a sect leader, so he wasn't someone who didn't know the severity of the situation. Since Yu Qianqiu could stand here and speak first, he was already not someone Fuxian Island could afford to offend. He didn't care about his reputation anymore. He had to drink the bitter wine he brewed himself. He squeezed out a smile and cupped his hands. Our Wuxia cultivators have been protected by Elder Bai for many years. Today, we heard that Elder Bai is going to the East Holy Land. Wuxia's 373 sect leaders came to send you off as a token of our goodwill. May I know which one is Elder Bai? Please allow us to thank you. The lords of the various countries looked at each other. Even Yu Qianqiu didn't expect nearly 400 sect leaders to come from Wuxia's cultivation world. Didn't that mean all the sects were here? What were these people trying to do? They were here to see Bai Changchun, so Yu Qianqiu couldn't say anything. However, Bai Changchun didn't say anything either. It was as if he hadn't heard anything. At that moment, a flying artifact flew out from the Wuxia's formation, attracting everyone's attention. Yu Qianqiu took a casual glance and immediately recognized them. They were people from the 4 great clans. The 4 clan leaders stood at the front of the flying artifact. The rest of the Chinese cultivation world didn't know Bai Changchun, but the 4 great families' patriarchs had seen him before. Now that the patriarch was in front of them, they naturally had to come out and greet him. Bai Shouji, a descendant of the Bai family, greets the ancestor. Bai Shouji knelt on the flying magic tool in front of everyone with an emotional expression. The 2 Bai clan elders behind him also lifted their long robes in excitement and knelt down to pay their respects. The ancestor's name shook the world. As a descendant, he felt honored. Wu clan, Jing clan, and Tan clan's juniors greet ancestor. The 3 clan leaders and 2 clan elders each knelt. Putting aside the other 3 clans, just Bai Shouji's words alone had shocked everyone. His surname was Bai, and he called Bai Changchun old ancestor. Didn't that mean, other than Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu, who were in the know, everyone else, including Nanming old ancestor, were shocked speechless? Especially those from Wuxia's cultivation world. They were all dumbfounded. At that moment, someone vaguely remembered that the 4 clans once had a very powerful figure. However, it was just a rumor without any proof. They didn't expect it to be the world's #1 expert. Bai Changchun. Everyone's gaze moved back and forth between the 4 clans and Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 clans and sighed. "What are you doing here?" There was a rare softness in his tone. No matter how ruthless he was, the 4 families in front of him were still his descendants. Now that he was leaving, his future was uncertain. Perhaps after this farewell, he would never have the chance to meet them again. Once Bai Changchun spoke, everyone's guess about the 4 clans became certain. They were really Bai Changchun's descendants. Oh my, he was Bai Changchun. The Wuxia cultivators first looked at Bai Changchun with great respect. Then, they looked at the 4 clans with complicated expressions. All of them cursed in their hearts. The 4 clans hid themselves too well. They had such a powerful backer, but they never revealed it. No wonder the 4 clans always advanced and retreated together. They were a family that wore the same pants. What's more, the sects that had conflicts with the 4 clans and had evil designs on the 4 clans were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. Bai Shouji, who was kowtowing, stood up and said excitedly, "Ancestor, I heard that you are going to the Holy East Land. How can the descendants of the 4 clans not come to send you off? Otherwise, we will be scolded by our descendants as unfilial descendants. Please don't be angry, ancestor. Please forgive us." "Forget it." Bai Changchun raised his hand at the 4 clans and said, "Get up." "Thank you, ancestor." The 4 clans kowtowed and stood up. They looked at Bai Changchun excitedly. Apart from the 4 clan heads, the other 6 clan elders had never seen Bai Changchun before. Originally, some of the 6 elders had doubts about the 4 clan heads going to the Demon Ghost region to see Bai Changchun. Now all their doubts were gone. All that was left was excitement. Ancestors' might shook the world. He was truly the world's #1 expert. This glory was enough for future generations to praise and be proud of. Yu Qianqiu, Bai Changchun suddenly called out. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thought that Bai Changchun wouldn't reveal their master-disciple relationship in front of everyone. However, since he had called out to him in front of everyone, it was time to announce their relationship. He immediately bowed and said, "Disciple is here." "Ah, he is." The surroundings immediately became chaotic, and a wave of exclamations rang out. Everyone was stunned and looked at Bai Changchun and Yu Qianqiu in disbelief. These two are actually master and disciple? Oh my god! Many of the feudal lords were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. Almost everyone had a part in hunting down Yu Qianqiu. Fortunately, that kid was lucky. If something really happened to him, it would be a big joke. Who was Bai Changchun? There was no need to doubt what would happen to him. Many people cursed Yu Qianqiu's 18 generations of ancestors in their hearts. He was forced to such a point, yet he still didn't reveal his backer. Even if he wanted to die, he didn't need to drag them down with him. Thank goodness, thank goodness, thank goodness this brat is still alive and kicking. The expressions of the soul formation stage feudal lords were rich and colorful. Now many people finally understood. No wonder this kid was always hanging out with Nongzhu. No wonder when Lanfeng began to support this kid after returning from the demon domain. No wonder this kid dared to run amok in the cultivation world, and was not afraid of anything. It turned out that he had Bai Changchun behind him. No wonder he was qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun now. The people of the Wuxia cultivation world all stared at Yu Qianqiu with complicated and fiery expressions. His background was too powerful. When this truth was announced, it was like a bolt from the blue to everyone. All of them were stunned. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 major families and said slowly, "If the 4 families live their lives according to their own will, if they encounter any trouble in the future, they don't seek to live forever and don't seek to be illustrious. As long as it's within your ability, there's no need to force it. You can be a little more considerate. This can also be considered as fulfilling the relationship between me and the 4 families." Yu Qianqiu didn't give any guarantee. He just cupped his hands and said indifferently, "Rest assured, master. This disciple will remember." Bai Changchun nodded slightly and waved to the 4 families. "There's nothing for you to do here. Go back quickly and live your own lives." The 4 families looked at each other. They were here to send off their ancestor. Now that the ancestor hadn't been sent off, how could they go back? Seeing that the 4 wanted to say something, Yu Qianqiu glanced at the soul formation stage feudal lords and said sternly, "For family heads, don't say anything more. Listen to master's arrangements and go back immediately. Don't make master angry. Otherwise, you will all be unfilial descendants." At this point, the 4 families didn't dare to disobey their ancestor. They all knelt again and said, "Yes, ancestor. Farewell, ancestor." Then they stood up and flew around the various sects on their flying Dharma artifact. Under the envious gazes of the sects, they quickly flew back to Wuxia. At this time, there was a commotion among the sects in Wuxia. They must have secretly sent the same message. They all bowed to Bai Changchun and said, "Greetings, Senior Bai." Yu Qianqiu looked at these people speechlessly. He didn't know what they wanted to do. But at this time he was suddenly stunned. Among the people bowing, there were 4 women in white standing on a flying Dharma artifact behind the people from Fuxian Island. 2 of them bowed, and the other 2 stood straight. They didn't bow. They were very eye-catching in the crowd. Yu Qianqiu knew the person in the lead. It was the Moon Clan Master, Jade Flower Fairy. Jade Flower Fairy was biting her lips and staring at them. Hua Rui, who was standing beside her, was also looking at them in astonishment. Yu Qianqiu guessed what they were looking at. He tilted his head and was slightly stunned. Suddenly he understood everything. They were looking at none other than the elegant island master of the South Sea purple bamboo forest, the famous Mr. Nongju. Nongju also looked at Jade Flower Fairy with a dumbfounded expression. He probably didn't expect to meet Jade Flower Fairy on Xianxian Island. The man and the woman finally met each other. Yu Qianqiu immediately lowered his head and laughed. He wanted to find a chance to drag Jade Flower Fairy to the South Sea purple bamboo forest to discuss Nongju. Now it seemed that there was no need at all. He didn't need to think about being the bad guy anymore. He just needed to watch the show. Seeing him laughing like this, Bai Changchun and the Nanming Patriarch looked at him with questioning eyes. When Yu Qianqiu noticed their eyes, he immediately felt that he had lost his composure. He coughed and straightened his expression. First, he sent a voice transmission to Bai Changchun. "Master, the beautiful woman standing at the front is Ziyi's mother." Then, as if wanting the world to be in chaos, he sent a telepathic message to Grandmaster Nanming. "Senior Nanming, the beautiful woman standing at the very front is an old flame that Senior Nongju secretly dumped. We haven't seen her for many years. Don't tell others that I said it." Chapter 710. Bai Changchun was already looking at Ziyi's mother. Ancestor Nanming asked in disbelief. "Nongju's lover? Really? You're not lying to me, are you?" "Senior Nanming, what are you talking about? I'm famous for my credibility. Everyone in the cultivation world knows that. I've never lied in my life. That woman is the leader of the Moon clan of Wuxia. People call her Fairy Qianghua. If you don't believe me, you can ask Senior Nongju. I promise I'm telling the truth. But don't tell him I said it, or he'll fight me to the death." "Okay. I know. Fairy Qianghua, the leader of the Moon clan of Wuxia?" Ancestor Nanming tilted his head and looked at Nongju. Seeing her dumbfounded look, he immediately believed Yu Qianqiu's words. He rolled his eyes and shouted at Fairy Qianghua. "Is that the leader of the Moon clan, Fairy Qianghua?" His words shocked everyone. Everyone looked at Ancestor Nanming, wondering how he knew Fairy Qianghua. Because of Yu Nantian and Hua Zongming's mistakes, the feudal lords of the various countries immediately let their imaginations run wild. Could it be that the Nanming old ancestor had also taken a fancy to this woman? Fairy Qianghua turned a deaf ear and kept biting her lips while looking at Nongju. On the other hand, Nongju was almost the same. Huarui came to her senses. She quickly pulled Fairy Qianghua and repeated what Ancestor Nanming said. People who could stand next to Bai Changchun were not ordinary people. They couldn't afford to offend them at all. However, her brother-in-law, the handsome and peerless brother-in-law, the brother-in-law named Xiao Yao, the brother-in-law who suddenly disappeared with a baby, she would never mistake him for someone else. That mortal from the mortal world was now standing at the peak of the cultivation world with Bai Changchun. Who exactly was he? Fairy Qianghua came back to her senses. She looked a bit sad. She turned and bowed slightly to Ancestor Nanming. "I'm the leader of the Moon clan, Qianghua. How do you know me? Forgive this junior's poor eyesight, but I don't think I've seen Senior before." Ancestor Nanming, who had been beaten up by Nongju in the dark because he had pinched Nongju's butt, was wearing a pair of red underpants. With his hands on his hips, he laughed out loud and said, "I am the island master of Xianxian Island. In the cultivation world, people call me Ancestor Nanming." His arrogant and proud laughter echoed in all directions. All the sects in Wuxia were astonished. It turned out that this was Nanming Ancestor, one of the four great men who was equally famous as Bai Changchun in the cultivation world. Qianghua Fairy was also slightly surprised. She bowed again and said, "Senior Nanming, it's my honor to meet you." Ancestor Nanming glanced at Nongju and saw that she was glaring at him. He was too lazy to pay attention to her, and continued to laugh. "I've long heard of Fairy Qianghua's great name. I would like to do my best as a host, and invite you to stay on Xianxian Island as a guest. Would you be willing to give me face?" Qianghua Fairy glanced at Nongju and replied solemnly, "How can I reject your invitation?" Good. Ancestor Nanming laughed and said good 3 times in a row. Then he stopped talking. Almost everyone present could not wrap their heads around this, and did not know what was going on. Bai Changchun, on the other hand, glanced at Yu Qianqiu, who was standing obediently on the side. Nongju frowned and seemed to have figured something out in an instant. She stared angrily at Yu Qianqiu, who looked like an honest man, and asked him telepathically, Yu Qianqiu, was it you who told Nanming ancestor Nanming? Yu Qianqiu immediately denied it with telepathy. No. Bullsh *t. Out of the four of us, only you and I have seen her. How could Nanming ancestor Nanming know that she is Qianghua Fairy, the head of the Moon Clan? Who else could it be if it wasn't you? Don't accuse a good person here. I was just wondering how Senior Nanming knew her. Yu Qianqiu replied. Do you think it's possible that old ancestor Nanming really admired Fairy Viburnum's name for a long time? In addition to Fairy Viburnum's outstanding appearance, he guessed it immediately. Oh my god! Could it be that Senior Nanming has taken a fancy to Fairy Jasper Flower? Oh my god! Then you guys are. Nongju's teeth hurt when she heard this. The muscles on her face twitched and a trace of panic flashed across her face. She turned to look at the smiling ancestor Nanming, and found that he was staring at Qianghua Fairy with an expression that he had never shown to any woman before. The more she looked like Qianghua Fairy. It was really like what Yu Qianqiu had said. At this moment, Bai Changchun slowly floated up into the sky and turned to face the black whirlpool in the white fog that enveloped the East Holy Land. His body gradually rose into the sky. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on the rising figure in the green robe. They all knew what he was going to do. The blue sky, the blue sea, the East Pole opened. Bai Changchun slowly rose into the sky, ready to take the risk alone. Although the figure in the green robe was thin, it gave people a sense of heroism at this moment. Nongju and ancestor Nanming's expressions instantly became solemn, and they were vaguely worried. The lords of various countries looked a little expectant, as if they could not wait for Bai Changchun to leave quickly. As for Yu Qianqiu, he seemed to be a little indifferent. He only came here to see how his master entered the legendary East Holy Land. If it was not for the long talk that lasted through the night, Yu Qianqiu would probably also be worried about Bai Changchun. However, after the long talk that lasted through the night, he knew the details of Bai Changchun's cultivation and basically, he was not worried anymore. Moreover, just in case, he even revealed the secret of the golden bead teleportation, and even gave Bai Changchun a bunch of small silver beads, so that if Bai Changchun encountered any danger that he could not solve, he could immediately contact him, and he would immediately move Bai Changchun out. All the Wuxia cultivators looked at each other, and they all looked at Feng Xiangtian expectantly. Feng Xiangtian had no choice but to bite the bullet and shout loudly, Senior Bai, the Wuxia cultivation world is in danger. Please save us, Senior. Bai Changchun turned a deaf ear to him and continued to rise. He was already close to the center of the black vortex. Swoosh! The lords of various countries stared at Feng Xiangtian like sharp blades, and they could not wait to poke a bloody hole in his body. What does this guy want to do? Does he want to summon Bai Changchun back to deal with us? Feng Xiangtian immediately felt chills all over his body when he was stared at by these people. However, the more he was at this juncture, the more he wanted to save himself. Just as he was about to call for help again, he saw a transparent light shield suddenly appear around Bai Changchun's body. Obviously, Bai Changchun was ready to go in. Senior Bai, the Wuxia cultivation world is in danger. Please save us, Senior. Feng Xiangtian shouted loudly again and again. However, Bai Changchun did not care about him at all. Even the lords of various countries could not be bothered to reason with him for the time being. All their attention was focused on the sky, and they could not take their eyes off him. Even with Bai Changchun's cultivation, he had released protective aura to protect his body. It could be seen that he did not dare to underestimate the situation, and had made thorough preparations. In the rapidly spinning black vortex, dense electric snakes shuttled back and forth like a net, like a monster opening its huge mouth to devour, staring at the green-robed figure floating in the air. Because of the sudden appearance of Bai Changchun in the wind gap, the originally whirling black vortex sucker suddenly made the invisible wind pillar, that had no resistance, become chaotic, almost turning into tangible wind blades, whipping at Bai Changchun's protective aura chi. Woo-woo. Swoosh swoosh. A shrill and strange sound appeared in the sky, like a giant beast opening its fangs with lightning and roaring. Suddenly, Bai Changchun's figure shot toward the center of the black vortex like a green meteor. Everyone's eyes could hardly react, and they saw the figure crash into the center of the black vortex in the blink of an eye. In an instant, rapid flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder appeared in the black vortex, as if the intruding figure had created a wave that resembled lightning. Then the movement gradually calmed down, and Bai Changchun's figure completely disappeared in the black vortex. Everyone present held their breaths with rapt attention. No one even breathed loudly. Although they saw Bai Changchun enter, they still stared fixedly at the black whirlpool with lightning bolts swirling around it. After a long time, it was estimated that the 6 hours of the opening of the Holy East Land was over. The black vortex embedded in the white fog gradually shrank, and the lightning in it shone with green light. Finally, along with the shrinking black vortex, it disappeared in the vast white fog. In an instant, the world returned to normal, and the rapid spinning sound disappeared. There was only the sound of the sea breeze blowing and the sound of the waves hitting the rocky shore. Everyone came back to their senses and looked at each other, especially the lords of the various countries. All of them let out a sigh of relief and looked at each other with an irrepressible smile of excitement. The number one expert in the world who had suppressed everyone for many years was finally gone. The terrifying expert who made everyone tremble with fear was finally gone. The god of death finally went to the Holy East Land where he would never return. The stone that had been pressing on everyone's hearts for many years was finally removed. The haze that had shrouded their hearts for many years was finally blown away. Breathing in the free sea breeze of Xianxian Island, they could feel a trace of sweetness. Pei Feng's eyes flickered as he looked around. After making eye contact with Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangde, Pei Feng couldn't help but let out an arrogant, jie laughter towards the sky. The two of them also laughed heartily. Their laughter echoed in the sky above Xianxian Island. The time that belonged to them had finally arrived. Bai Changchun was gone, and Yin Baikong was dead. As long as the three of them united, Bing Qingzi and Hu Changsha would not be difficult to deal with. As long as they took care of these two. Although when Lanfeng's cultivation was high, he was actually the easiest person to deal with. As long as they spent some time and played some tricks, they would not have to worry about not being able to deal with him. As long as they took care of these three people, from now on, no one in this world would be able to restrict their freedom. How could they not be happy when they thought of the day where they could freely roam the world after cultivating for a lifetime? The people of the Chinese cultivation world already felt that the situation was not good. They all regretted coming here. Now, it was tantamount to sending sheep into a tiger's mouth. All of them started to beat a retreat in their hearts and slowly retreated, hoping that the lords of the various countries would not bother with them now that they were in high spirits. This person could always come up with childish ideas to comfort me when he was on the verge of despair. Actually, most of the spirit-severing realm lords were indeed in high spirits, and did not have any thoughts of taking care of them now. However, when Yanji glanced over, his killing intent instantly rose. He immediately shouted angrily, "All of you stop." His proud disciple had died in the Chinese cultivation world. He had long since lost his good impression of the Chinese cultivators. How could he let them go now? Chapter 7:11. Before he finished speaking, Yanji's figure had already disappeared from where he was, and blocked the retreat of the Wuxia sections. He floated in the air with a ferocious expression and sneered, "Want to run? Since you've delivered yourselves to me, why don't you all stay here?" The small sects that had been standing at the back immediately became the first to retreat. Some of them even almost bumped into Yanji, who had suddenly appeared. They were so frightened that they quickly retreated with their flying celestial devices. The Wuxia sects were like birds startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They were all in a mess, huddling together and taking unnecessary precautions. Seeing this scene, many of the feudal lords burst into laughter. Yanji was obviously very proud of his ability to scare the Wuxia sects like this. He pointed at the sect that almost bumped into him and said arrogantly, "How dare you talk back to me? All of you kneel and kowtow to apologize, or I'll start with you first." There were only 3 people standing on the small flying celestial device. Hearing this, All of them were extremely indignant. However, they were no match for Yanji, who was a legendary soul formation expert. They might not be able to escape today. Nongzhu and the great ancestor of Nanming silently looked at the wild lords of the various countries, and didn't say anything. These people had been suppressed by Bai Changchun for many years. Now that Bai Changchun had left, they would probably vent their pent-up anger on these Wuxia cultivators. It was understandable. But then again, did it matter to them whether the Wuxia cultivators lived or died? For those who struggled in the cultivation world, life and death were all decided in an instant. Life and death were not important. This was actually a part of cultivation. It all depended on whether one could break through safely. However, Yu Qianqiu's expression was not so good. He had long known that these Wuxia cultivators would definitely be unlucky to break through at this time. Otherwise, Bai Changchun wouldn't have let the 4 clans leave first. There were some things that Bai Changchun was well aware of. The world was full of misfortunes. Once he left, it would be useless to worry about what would happen after him. For the sake of his relationship with the 4 great families, he had stayed for a while, and bought time for the 4 great families to leave. He had already done his best. Yu Qianqiu was well aware of this, which was why he helped Bai Changchun urge the 4 families to leave. Although he himself did not have a good impression of the people of the Chinese cultivation world. And after the long talk with Bai Changchun that night, his view of the situation was no longer limited to the Chinese cultivation world, but the whole world. If Yanji were to kill someone, he might weigh the pros and cons and turn a blind eye to it in order to protect himself. However, Yanji actually made a Chinese cultivator kneel and accept the humiliation. After all, he was born in the Wuxia cultivation world. It was difficult for him to watch the Wuxia cultivators being humiliated before their death. He had the urge to stand up for the Wuxia cultivators. This kind of impulsive nature was called bloodthirstiness. In his previous life, it was because of this kind of uncontrollable bloodthirstiness that ultimately led to the tragic end of his fate. Yu Qianqiu clenched his fists, but in the end, he still endured it. Nongzhu slightly tilted her head and glanced at him. At this moment, one of the 3 people on the flying celestial device that almost hit Yanji suddenly turned around and shouted, "Yu Qianqiu, I am Tu Yanfeng, an elder of the Huaxiao Imperial Sword Sect. Do you remember what you said to me in the Cultivation Alliance?" Everyone stared at Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu and the ancestor of Nanming also looked at him curiously, wondering what on earth Yu Qianqiu had said to him. Many Huaxia cultivators remembered that when Yu Qianqiu left the Cultivation Alliance, he had promised Tu Yanfeng that if the Imperial Sword Sect encountered any trouble, he could use the name of Yu Qianqiu. Tu Yanfeng was a straightforward person. Otherwise, he would not have clashed with Yu Qianqiu even though he knew that he was no match for him. At this critical moment he still spoke tactfully. Although he wanted to beg Yu Qianqiu, he only reminded Yu Qianqiu if he still remembered what he had said in the past. If Yu Qianqiu had forgotten, he would not say anything more. He just wanted to try with a glimmer of hope. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He stared at Tu Yanfeng's face and tried to recognize him. He immediately remembered what Tu Yanfeng said when he pretended to be generous and let him go. Although he clearly saw Yanji staring at him with a pair of cold eyes that were filled with killing intent, he still smiled. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Elder Tu from the Imperial Sword School. Since we're old acquaintances, please come and have a chat." Before Tu Yanfeng could reply, the head of the Imperial Sword Sect had already flown over on his flying celestial device and floated in front of Yu Qianqiu. Tu Yanfeng glanced at the head slightly and looked a little embarrassed. At the head's greeting, the 3 of them jumped down, put away their flying celestial devices, and bowed to Ancestor Nanming, Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu. Ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu just looked at them expressionlessly and had no intention of paying attention to them. Instead, Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Elder Tu, I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been?" Tu Yanfeng looked a little ashamed. He lowered his head and cupped his hands, not saying anything. Yu Qianqiu nodded with a smile. To be honest, this kind of person who was too ashamed was not suitable to live in the cultivation world, but he admired him. Yanji stared at them and sneered. He squinted his eyes and asked, Yu Qianqiu, what do you mean? Do you want to protect them from me? Yu Qianqiu's gaze slowly shifted from Tu Yanfeng to Yanji. He asked in a neutral tone. From what you're saying, could it be that you want to kill them from my hands? The meaning of his words could not be clearer. It was obvious that he wanted to protect the people of the Imperial Sword School. Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming frowned at the same time. Among the feudal lords, many people were already laughing mockingly. They were laughing at Yu Qianqiu for overestimating himself. Yanji immediately threw his head back and laughed loudly. You want to protect them? I haven't even settled the score of killing this old man's disciple, but you've already delivered yourself to me. Yu Qianqiu said disdainfully. Old man, it's not that I'm looking down on you, but I'm standing right here. If you have the ability, come and try to touch me. Presumptuous. It's time to settle the score between us. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong rose into the air and stood at the same level as the people on the mountain peak. Although their words were directed at Yu Qianqiu, they were also staring at Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming. Their meaning was clear. They wanted to suppress ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu, preventing them from interfering with Yanji's killing of Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming's faces darkened. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. They were ready to protect Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu, in particular, took out the bamboo flute from her waist and held it in her hand. Her whole body was bursting with fighting spirit. She could not tolerate someone bullying Bai Changchun's disciple as soon as he left. Seeing that someone was cooperating with him, Yanji was full of smiles. He shook his head and said, Yu Qianqiu, I wanted to spare your life today for the sake of Bai Changchun. Who knew that you would come to me to court death? Bai Changchun is not here anymore. Who do you think you are? Give me your life. With a loud shout, Yanji turned into a shadow and directly rushed over. He was as fast as lightning, carrying the momentum of wind and thunder. He arrived in the blink of an eye. Almost at the same time, Nongzhu shouted angrily, Nanming, protect Yu Qianqiu. He had already rushed out. With a loud bang, the two phantoms collided and directly collided together. Obviously, Nongzhu's cultivation was higher. Yanji let out a muffled groan, and his body was directly knocked back. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong looked at each other and nodded solemnly. They both shot toward Nongzhu in the air. In an instant, Nongzhu split into two figures in the air and faced the two of them respectively. Bang bang. A strong bang set off a raging air wave, forcing the Wuxia cultivators to almost lose their balance on their flying celestial devices. All of them stared at the duel between the two masters of the soul formation stage in horror. They were too powerful. The aftershock of the fight was not something they could bear. Holding a golden net in his hand, Nanming ancestor moved to the side of Yu Qianqiu and watched the fight in the sky with a red face. Yu Qianqiu's eyes were like an owl. Two balls of black flames were jumping rapidly in his eyes, and the killing intent on his face could not be suppressed. The three people who were fighting fiercely turned into two messy shadows. Bang bang, bang. They directly flew up into the sky. The lords of the various countries watched the fight with interest. It seemed that they wanted to see who would be the unlucky one. Pei Fong in particular had a beaming smile on his face. Yanji, who was knocked away, stopped retreating. He looked down at his chest, where a very conspicuous footprint was left. He raised his hand angrily and wiped off a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. A shiny black whip appeared in his hand. He stared at the sky and shouted angrily, Nongzhu, today is the day you die. His figure shot up into the sky. Just you. Nongzhu snorted disdainfully. Suddenly, hundreds of Nongzhu appeared in the sky and surrounded Hua Zongming, Pu Taidong, and Yanji. The four people fought fiercely and crazily in the sky. The shadows intertwined in the sky, fighting back and forth. Loud noises were heard constantly, and the airwaves covered the sky and the earth. Those whose cultivation was below the deification stage could not tell who the four people were. In the angry rebuke, Nongzhu actually fought evenly against the three people. At this time, the three people in the sky were fighting against Nongzhu, but it seemed that Nongzhu had surrounded the three of them. Others might not see the reason, but the lords of the deification stage from various countries looked at each other in dismay. They all seemed to find it hard to believe. because they could see that Nongju was fighting against 3 people, and she actually had the upper hand. Many people could not associate the previous Nongju, who did not do proper work, with the current Nongju who was fierce and fierce. It was really unexpected. The 4 people in the fierce battle were all at the middle stage of deification, but Nongju was not at a disadvantage against 3 people. Pei Fong squinted at the sky and said, Nongju's transfiguration transposition skill is really worthy of its reputation, coupled with her good cultivation. I'm afraid Hua Zongming and the other 2 people can't take advantage of her. It seems that Nongju is not far from breaking through the final stage of deification. When he said the last sentence, there was a hint of gloominess in his tone. Qi Jiujuan said expressionlessly, It's a pity that Mu Sang, Miao Hanyuan, and Xuxin are not here. Otherwise, we can see if Nongju can fight against 6 people with her transfiguration transposition skill. Pei Fong chuckled and said, Mu Sang and Miao Hanyuan will naturally help when they are here. However, Xuxin seems to be in the same boat as Nongju. I don't know who will help who. His words immediately made the lords of various countries laugh. Chapter 7:12. The lords of various countries were in a good mood. They were all watching the show, but the Wuxia cultivators were watching the fierce fight above them in horror. They didn't dare to leave or run away. They were all standing there restlessly. With tears in her eyes, Qianghua Fairy stared at the fierce fight in the sky. Her red lips moved and she murmured with a bitter smile, Nongju. He is Mr. Nongju, the famous owner of the purple bamboo forest in the South Sea. Mr. Nongju is Xiaoyao, and Xiaoyao is Mr. Nongju. Why did you lie to me? You lied to me so miserably. Yanji's words, Nongju, today is the day you die, immediately made Qianghua Fairy, who had been paying attention to Nongju, understand everything. Hua Rui, who was beside her, stared at the sky in a daze, her eyes shining with a strange light. She had never expected that her brother-in-law, who had suddenly disappeared, was such a powerful figure. He was also a famous figure in the cultivation world. His cultivation was too strong. It was said that he was a close friend of the most powerful cultivator in the world. My God! What on earth did my sister miss? Bang! A heavy sound came from high up in the sky. A figure smashed into the sea like a meteor, creating a huge splash. Before the waves had completely returned, the falling figure shot out from the ocean once again. With an angry roar it said, Kill him together. It was Yanji's voice. It seemed like he had suffered a loss again. As soon as he finished speaking, 2 beams of sword light appeared in the sky. They shone with each other and strangled Nongju's hundreds of phantoms crazily. Yanji, who had rushed up to the sky, waved the long whip in his hand completely. In an instant, the dark and gloomy whip shadows shot out disorderly like arrows. After cooperating with Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong, who were moving freely in the sky, they immediately suppressed the over 100 shadows of Nongju to less than 50. It made people feel that Nongju was in a precarious situation. Qianghua Fairy was still immersed in the memories of the past with tears in her eyes, but Hua Rui was a little worried by the movement above. Senior Nanming, go and help Senior Nongju. I'm fine here, Yu Qianqiu said in a low voice. Although he couldn't see clearly what was happening above, he could feel that Nongju's qi power was suppressed by Yanji and the other 2. Old ancestor Nanming turned around to look at him, and he was instantly slightly shocked. He discovered that there were 2 balls of pitch-black flames leaping about in Yu Qianqiu's eyes, as if they were about to jump out of his eye sockets uncontrollably. Moreover, he could faintly feel a bone-chilling coldness from Yu Qianqiu's body. That faintly discernible and terrifying aura made one's hair stand on end. Nongju will be fine for the time being. The old man still has some powerful skills that he hasn't used yet. Just as Patriarch Nanming finished speaking, the situation in the sky suddenly changed. Dozens of phantoms of Nongju, who had been suppressed by the 3 of them, suddenly emerged from the gaps of their encirclement. Dozens of phantoms danced in the air like flying fairies. The speed was getting faster and faster. The people watching from below only felt that their eyes were blurred. In an instant, each of Nongju's phantoms suddenly appeared as a clone. In the blink of an eye, Hundreds of vivid and lifelike Nongzhu appeared in the air and surrounded the three of them again. Yanji and the other two were so fast that their figures could not be seen clearly. They attacked each of Nongzhu's phantoms crazily, but it seemed that every attack missed. They couldn't find out which one was the real Nongzhu. All of Nongzhu's phantoms suddenly stopped moving in the air. Some were standing, some were lying, some were leaning, some were tilting, and some were sitting with their legs crossed. Each of them was vivid and lifelike. They were handsome and elegant, fully displaying the peerless elegance of the most handsome man in the world. Every attack of Yanji and the other two easily pierced, slashed through each of the phantoms. They had no effect on the hundreds of phantoms that stopped in the air. Because they were all phantoms, physical attacks had no effect on them. Just when the three of them had attacked every phantom without any effect, the hundreds of phantoms stared at the three of them with smiles on their faces. Suddenly, they gently placed the flute to their lips in unison. Their 10 fingers moved up and down the flute holes in a carefree and unrestrained manner. A melodious flute sound reverberated endlessly between the heaven and the earth. Suddenly the world became clear. It seemed that the people could no longer hear the whistling wind, or the sound of the raging waves hitting the shore. They were in the sea area, but at this moment, they suddenly found themselves in a brilliant sea of flowers. The spring sun was beautiful, and the flowers were gorgeous. Many butterflies were flying in the sea of flowers, and many children were running happily in the sea of flowers. They seemed to have returned to their childhood, playing hide and seek and catching butterflies in the flowers. And they were one of the happy children. Just when they were gradually immersed in the happy times of their childhood, Pei Fong suddenly shouted angrily, "What a powerful sound illusion!" The phantoms in front of them suddenly shattered like porcelain vases that had fallen to the ground. All the beautiful scenes were shattered into pieces by Pei Fong's angry shout. In front of them was still Xianxian Island, and still the sea area. They were all illusions. Everyone was shocked. Only now did they remember that the fight was still going on. But why was there no sound of fighting? They hurriedly looked again, and just happened to see a body with its head smashed into pieces, falling powerlessly into the sea. In the air, Nongzhu and Hua Zongming stood face to face. However, Hua Zongming's head drooped down powerlessly. From his back, several bloody holes could be seen. A bamboo flute had pierced through his chest and drilled out from his heart. The hole at the end of the flute was bleeding profusely. Yanji's eyes were wide open, and he looked at Nongzhu in disbelief. He was swaying in the air, and the whip in his hand had long disappeared. One of his hands was covering his throat, and blood was flowing through the gaps between his fingers. His other hand, which was covering the left side of his chest, was also a patch of bright red. "Yanji, I told you that you couldn't kill me, but you just didn't believe me. I didn't want to kill anyone, but you forced me to kill you. Why do you have to do this?" Nongzhu looked at Yanji expressionlessly and said. Suddenly, a heavy palm landed on Hua Zongming's chest. The flute flew out from Hua Zongming's back and shot out in an arc. With a bang, it directly blew Yanji's head into pieces. The two corpses fell to the sea at the same time, splashing 2 waves. Nongzhu's flute drilled into the sea with a whoosh. It stirred in the sea for a while, and then bounced out with a bang, landing in Nongzhu's hand in the air. Nongzhu held it in her hand and looked at it, as if she was checking if it was clean. Then she nodded with satisfaction, and teleported back to Nanming ancestor and Yu Qianqiu's side. Everyone looked at Nongzhu in shock. Whether it was the lords of the various countries or the Wuxia cultivators, they didn't expect that Nongzhu could kill 3 lords of the mid-divine transformation realm in the blink of an eye. 1 against 3. They were all at the mid-divine transformation realm, but he killed them all, and he was completely unharmed. What did this mean? The lords of the various countries looked at each other. Yanji, Hua Zongming, and Pu Taidong died just like that? This was a little hard for them to accept. They thought that Nongzhu would have a hard time in the future without Bai Changchun's support. Now it seemed that even without Bai Changchun's support, as long as he didn't offend the late divine transformation realm cultivators, he could still live freely without Bai Changchun's support. The skills he showed just now were enough to prove it. At least from the current situation, most of the lords might not be a match for Nongzhu. Jade Flower Fairy bit her lip. She didn't change at all because of Nongzhu's powerful skills. She still looked resentful with tears in her eyes. However, Huarui was different. Not only was she excited, but she couldn't hide the excitement in her eyes. She really wanted to run to Nongju, pull his arm and call him brother-in-law happily, just like in the past. Huarui's imagination ran wild. If brother-in-law could reconcile with sister, with brother-in-law's ability, who would dare to touch the Moon Clan in the future? Nongju looked around coldly. The murderous aura around him was still there. He actually wasn't a bloodthirsty person. He just wanted to live a carefree life without competing with the world. He didn't want to offend anyone on purpose, nor did he want to have conflicts with anyone. He didn't want to kill anyone either. That was because he thought that he was born with no ambition. There was no need for him to waste his energy fighting with others. However, he wasn't a soft-hearted person either. When it was time to kill, he never hesitated. Today, even though he killed to protect Yu Qianqiu, it was also to avoid trouble for himself in the future. He deliberately killed in front of everyone to intimidate them. As soon as Bai Changchun left, these people showed their arrogance and were ready to make trouble. They actually targeted Bai Changchun's disciple. If he didn't intimidate them now, when would he? Once they attacked together, he wouldn't be able to block them even if he wanted to with his current level of cultivation. Ancestor Nanming glanced at Nongju. He didn't seem surprised that Nongju could kill Yanji and the other two. On the other hand, Yu Qianqiu was a little surprised. However, he wasn't surprised because Bai Changchun once told him not to underestimate Nongju. She wasn't as easy to bully as she looked. However, Yu Qianqiu kept looking at the flute in Nongju's hand. He felt a little nauseous. This was definitely not the first time this flute had killed someone. He thought of Nongju playing the flute next to his lips, and then the scene of his opponent's intestines being pierced or brains being smashed. How could he stuff such a disgusting thing into his mouth? He really had to give it to him. That scene was like a bloodthirsty swordsman licking his lips after killing the enemy and tasting the blood on his sword. The atmosphere was a little quiet. Pei Fong stared at Nongju coldly. He looked left and right and transmitted his voice to Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangda. You've all seen it. Nongju is very likely to break through to the soul transformation final stage soon. Keeping him here won't do us any good. Why don't we take the opportunity now? What do you think? The two nodded slightly, obviously agreeing with Pei Fong's words. Pei Fong immediately chuckled and looked up at Nongju. Nongju, I really couldn't tell. What a good trick. Even I, Pei Fong, have to admire you. However, almost all the forces here had disciples who died in the hands of Yu Qianqiu. It's time to end it today. Nongju, I advise you to hand over Yu Qianqiu obediently. Don't put up any unnecessary resistance. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite. Chapter 7:13. The lords of the spirit-severing realm quickly exchanged glances. None of them were fools. The meaning behind Pei Fong's words was self-evident. Ancestor Nanming quickly glanced at Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan, and Ouyangda. Yu Qianqiu gnashed his teeth in hatred. Sure enough, none of them were good. They were all capricious villains. Damn fatty, don't fall into my hands. Otherwise I'll make you feel good. Nongju also narrowed her eyes and sneered. Fatty Pei, when Bai Changchun was here, you still called Yu Qianqiu brother you. Why do you want to kill him in the blink of an eye? I haven't seen your brother do anything wrong to you. Could it be that you're deliberately looking for trouble and want to get rid of me as well? Pei Fong didn't mind being seen through by Nongju. Instead, he laughed and said, Nongju, if you insist on saying that, then what else can I say? He floated in the air and said with a laugh, then let me have a taste of brother Nongju's shifting position transposition skill. No problem, but before that, I have something to confirm with you, Nongju said. Pei Fong waved his hand and pretended to be generous. Say it. As long as it's something that can be said, I'll tell you. What he said was the same as not saying it. Nongju snorted. I've asked you about this matter in the cornucopia before. That day, when Yu Qianqiu confronted the underworld messenger at the cornucopia, the underworld messenger suddenly found out about Yu Qianqiu's identity when he was leaving. Was it you who leaked it? Pei Fong's smile froze. He didn't expect that she would suddenly ask about this matter. He He immediately became angry and shouted, "Nongzhu, don't talk nonsense here. I've already said that it's none of my business." He was the one who did it, but he definitely wouldn't admit it. The reputation of betraying the enemy and colluding with the enemy was much worse than some bad reputation. Nongzhu sneered. She looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Do you know what to do now?" Yu Qianqiu stared at Pei Fong coldly. He knew that Nongzhu would not say something like that without reason. It seemed that Pei Fong had done something behind her back then. It was no wonder that the green-browed guy had suddenly turned against him. Yu Qianqiu stared at Pei Fong coldly. But the strange thing was, why did Nongzhu tell him this now? However, Nongzhu's next words immediately made him understand. Nongzhu said, "Help me take care of Zi." Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Nongzhu obviously knew that he was no match for Pei Fong, and she was entrusting him with her funeral. At this time, Nongzhu told him that she had been plotted against by Pei Fong. She just wanted to tell him that she would avenge him if there was a chance. Nongzhu was ready to die. Ancestor Nanming suddenly looked at Nongzhu. He and Nongzhu were old friends, but he didn't understand why Nongzhu thought that Yu Qianqiu could escape and have a chance to avenge him. In addition to Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangda were also eyeing him covetously. Of course, he didn't know that Bai Changchun had once told Nongzhu that Yu Qianqiu was more resistant to death than the two of them. It seemed that he had a treasure to protect him, which made it difficult for others to kill him. Therefore he pinned his hope on Yu Qianqiu. "Don't talk nonsense. I'll take care of your disciple for you." Pei Fong suddenly burst out a terrible momentum, and the airflow around him spread out like visible waves. Hua Rui suddenly grabbed Jasper Flower Fairy's arm, looking very nervous. If it was before, they might not know who Pei Fong was. But since the cultivation world of Wuxia extended its tentacles, they naturally heard of this master at the last stage of Wuxia. He was one of the legendary top 10 masters. Could Nongzhu deal with him? Damn it. Damn fatty, just you wait and see. Yu Qianqiu cursed in his heart, and prepared to escape with Nongzhu. He couldn't let Nongzhu die in Pei Fong's hands. As for the Nanming Patriarch, as one of the 4 great men, Pei Fong didn't dare to hurt him easily. He just had to take Nongzhu away. After all, he didn't know much about the Nanming Patriarch. The fewer people who knew about the secret of Utopia, the better. However, at this critical moment, a figure suddenly teleported over and stood in front of Nongzhu. He sneered at Pei Fong and said, "Pei Fong, you're going too far. Bai Changchun just left, and you're doing this. It's really disappointing. I'll be the first one who can't stand it anymore." It was Hu Changshou, who had been standing at the side without saying a word. Nongzhu, Yu Qianqiu, and the Nanming Patriarch looked at each other. They didn't expect Hu Changshou to come out to help. It was too surprising. Especially Yu Qianqiu. He had a feud with the Yun Palace, and Hu Changshou had wanted to kill him for a long time. Why did he come out to help now? This was simply too inconceivable. Not to mention them, even the feudal lords were at a loss. When did Hu Changshou become a Samaritan? Didn't he know that Pei Fong, Ouyangda, and Qi Jiujuan were on the same side? Did he have the ability to fight the 3 of them alone? Hu Changshou. Pei Fong was stunned at first, then he sneered and said, "When did you were the same side as Nongzhu? You came here to act like a hero. I hope you don't run later." We didn't look for you, but you came to die. Great. Today is a good day to settle the score between us." As soon as he finished speaking, Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangda had already flashed over. They stared at Hu Changshou with killing intent. Seeing that a battle was inevitable, everyone slowly retreated. A battle between Soul Formation final stage experts was no joke. Hu Changshou said calmly, "Settle the score?" "I don't know who will settle the score. Even if I don't stop you, you probably don't have the guts to touch them. If you're not afraid of that person from the demon domain, go ahead and attack." Haha. Pei Fong's fat face shook as he cackled. "Hu Changshou, I think you're out of your mind. Bai Changchun has already gone to the East Holy Land, and you're still using him to scare us. Now the demon domain." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly felt as if someone was strangling his neck. He couldn't laugh anymore, and the fat on his face stiffened. Qi Jiujuan and Ouyangda's expressions also changed abruptly. as if they remembered something. Laugh. Why aren't you laughing anymore? Fatty Pei, continue laughing. Wu Changshu sneered and said, I think you're too excited. It's true that Bai Changchun left, but don't forget that the demon domain torturers are passed down from generation to generation. If one Bai Changchun leaves, there's always another Bai Changchun. Every torturer of the demon domain torturer was a figure whose name shook the world. For countless years, no one had ever been able to resist the demon domain. Fatty Pei, if you have the guts, then do something. I don't believe that the current torturer can watch the previous torturer's disciple get bullied. I'd like to see if you can survive a month after you touch Yu Qianqiu. Really? Why do I have to remind you that some people are restless and like to look for excitement? The feudal lords fell silent. They realized that everyone was too excited. How could they forget this? Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu looked at each other speechlessly. The two of them didn't even think of using the demon domain torturers to scare them, because they knew that the current torturers couldn't do anything to them. Who knew that Hu Changshu would come out and make a big show of himself? They didn't expect it to work. Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up slightly, and he had a plan in his heart. The expressions on Pei Fong and the other two's faces were complicated. They'd said what they wanted to say, and they'd also taken a stance. Now they were in a difficult position. However, Pei Fong's skin wasn't just ordinarily thick. He immediately laughed and said, Brother Hu, look at what you're saying. Brother Yu and I hit it off when we were in the cornucopia. Why would I harm him? I'm just afraid that he'll be sad to see Master leave, so I purposely joked with him. Then he waved his hand at Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu and said, Brother Nongzhu, Brother Yu, don't take it to heart. I was just joking with you. Even Ouyangda and Qi Jiujuan squeezed out a few smiles. It's not without reason that he's fat. He's thick-skinned. Hu Changshu said sarcastically. However, Pei Fong was really thick-skinned, so he didn't care about his sarcasm. He said with a smile, From what Brother Hu said, do you know who the current torturer of the demon domain is? Hu Changshu snorted coldly and didn't answer. In fact, he didn't know who the current torturer of the demon domain was. The reason why he stood out to help Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu now was because he had his own plans. Now that Yin Baikong was dead, and Bing Qingzi believed that Yan Juexing was haunted and had a tendency to be independent, he was no different from a loner now. The next target of Pei Fong and the others would definitely be him, so he had to find a way to protect himself. Just when he didn't know what to do, Pei Fong and the other two gave him a chance to get closer to Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu by forsaking their former enmity. He could also see that Nongzhu's cultivation was probably not far from breaking through to the late stage of deity transformation. If he could take this opportunity to form an alliance with Nongzhu, he might be able to pull Wen Lanfeng in. Maybe he could also build a relationship with the demon domain, and then he wouldn't have to be afraid of Fatty Pei and the others. As for whether it would work or not, it was another matter. Even if it didn't work, he had to give it a try. At least, people like Nongzhu valued friendship and would return it when they owed a favor. Haha. Brother Hu is really tight-lipped. Pei Fong smiled to cover up his embarrassment and turned to ask Yu Qianqiu. Brother Yu, may I know who the current torturer of the demon domain is? Don't get me wrong, we just want to know who it is so that we can congratulate him for taking over the demon domain, so that we can call him by his name when we meet. That's all. Damn it. You turn hostile faster than turning a page. Once I say that I'm the new torturer, you'll turn hostile again. Yu Qianqiu sneered. I'd better not say his name, so as not to scare you. You'll naturally know who he is when there's a chance. Pei Fong's expression froze, and he, Ouyangda and Qi Jiujuan looked at each other. The three of them racked their brains, but they couldn't think of anyone's name that could scare him except Bai Changchun. Could it be Wen Lanfeng? It seemed that there was no one in the cultivation world who could make them worry, except for Wen Lanfeng. Could there be a master that they didn't know? Chapter 714. After a moment of hesitation, Qi Jiujuan sent a voice transmission to his two companions. I don't know if he's telling the truth. Whether he's telling the truth or not, we can't afford to take that risk. It's easy to find out if he's telling the truth. Let's go to the demon ghost realm and have a look. If it's true, we'll talk about it later. If it's false, we don't have to rush to deal with them. I don't think they can run away now, Pei Fong said. After a while of discussion, the three of them reached an agreement. Patting his belly, Pei Fong laughed at the crowd and said, "The new punishment enforcer of the demon ghost domain has been replaced. After sending Bai Changchun away, we should go congratulate the new punishment enforcer for taking over the demon ghost domain. I wonder if everyone would like to go with us?" The lords exchanged glances. They had been living together in the cultivation world for so many years, and they all knew what kind of person Pei Fong was. They all knew what he wanted to do. He just wanted to see if the current torture master of the demon ghost realm was easy to bully. If he was easy to bully, Pei Fong and the other two would not go to congratulate him but to send him off. The reason why he wanted to gather everyone was probably because he had the mentality that the law couldn't punish too many people. No matter how powerful the torture master of the demon ghost realm was, it was unlikely that he could kill all the soul formation cultivators in the world. But then again, everyone wanted Pei Fong and the other two to have the ability to send the current torture master off. Without the suppression of the demon ghost realm, everyone's life would be better. Otherwise, no one would feel comfortable with a pair of terrifying eyes staring at them from behind. Even if a fight really broke out, there was someone who stood up for them, and they didn't need to do anything. They could even watch the show. Why not? Someone immediately shouted, "Yes, it's common sense to say goodbye to the old and welcome the new. We should go to the demon ghost realm to congratulate him." With one person taking the lead, everyone followed. Good, good, good. Pei Fong looked at the crowd with a smile, and then cupped his hands to Nongzhu and the others, saying, "Guys, it's just a misunderstanding. Please don't take it to heart. We've sent Bai Changchun away. We'll go to the demon ghost realm to congratulate the new torture master. Goodbye." He did not expect Nongzhu and the others to be kind to him. As soon as he finished his words, he flew away with Qi Jujuan and Ouyangda. The lords also bid farewell to Nongzhu and the others. In the blink of an eye, all the lords of the soul formation stage had left, leaving only 3 dead bodies on the sea. The people of the Chinese cultivation world heaved a sigh of relief. They had thought that they were going to face a disaster today. They didn't expect that they would be lucky enough to get through it. After this lesson, they realized that everyone's thinking was simply too naive. Spirit-severing experts simply wouldn't put them in their eyes. Not to mention Bai Changchun, no matter how much Feng Xiangtian shouted, Bai Changchun wouldn't even look him in the eye, let alone talk to him. Everyone was still in shock and didn't dare to stay any longer. Besides, the 2 soul formation stage experts in front of them also didn't take them seriously. If they stayed any longer, who knew what other accidents would happen? Thus, one by one, they carefully excused themselves and quickly left with their tails between their legs. They had come with hope, but in the end, they discovered that everything was just a bubble, and they had to go back and find another way out. Reality was always cruel and could easily destroy all beautiful dreams. Of course, there were people who didn't leave. The flying ritual implement of the Moon Clan didn't move at all. Jade Flower Fairy and the others faced the sea breeze, the corners of their white dresses fluttering in the wind as they looked over quietly. However, Nongzhu deliberately ignored them. She held the flute with her hands behind her back expressionlessly and looked into the distance. However, the fingertips of her slender fingers that were holding the flute were deeply embedded in the flesh of her palm. Who asked that relationship to leave such a deep scar in the hearts of a man and a woman? They wanted to forget it, but when they thought about it, they realized that it was all hatred. They didn't know that it was because they loved each other so deeply that they were hurt so deeply and hated each other so much. The people of the Sword Clan didn't leave either. The leader of the Sword Clan looked at Nanming Ancestor and Nongzhu uneasily. He wanted to go up and talk to them, but he realized that they didn't even look at him. Thus, he cupped his hands at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Yu Qianqiu, my clan is very grateful for your help this time. I really don't know how to repay you." In fact, Yu Qianqiu didn't only save his clan. If it weren't for Yu Qianqiu's interference, the other soul formation lords wouldn't have let these Wuxia cultivators go at all. Not to mention Yan Ji. Yu Qianqiu glanced at him coldly, then looked at Tu Yanfeng and said with a faint smile, "Elder Tu, I fulfilled my promise back then. From now on, we don't owe each other anything. Tu Yanfeng cupped his hands and thanked him, sweating profusely. The leader of the Sword Clan's expression changed slightly. He squeezed out a smile and wanted to continue their relationship. Unexpectedly, Nongju glared at him coldly and said indifferently, "If you don't scram, you'll die." Immediately, the leader was so scared that he shivered. He threw out his flying magic tool and quickly escaped with a few people. Looking at the group of black dots disappearing in the distant sky, Nanming Ancestor sighed and said, "It's a pity that Bai Changchun left. If he was still here, they wouldn't have dared to do this. A group of fickle villains. None of them are good people. It's useless to be angry." Nongju turned to look at Yu Qianqiu and asked worriedly, "They've all gone to the demon realm. What are you going to do?" Yu Qianqiu turned a deaf ear to her and stared at the surface of the sea with bright eyes. Suddenly, he flew over quickly and landed on the surface of the sea. He drove the waves and searched for a few storage pouches from the corpses of Hua Zongming and the other two. After checking them one by one, he instantly beamed with joy. Ignoring the shocked gazes of the crowd, he directly stuffed the pouches into his arms and flew back. "What did you say just now?" Yu Qianqiu asked, patting the things under his chest. Nongju's face suddenly became long and she roared, "Pei Fong and the others have gone to the demon realm. What are you going to do?" Not to mention the matter of Jasper Flower Fairy, he was upset at the thought that Shuntian Island would be trampled by those people. However, as the current punishment envoy, Yu Qianqiu was still greedy for petty gains. How could he not be angry? Yu Qianqiu looked back at the sky and sneered. "Let them go. There are people on Shuntian Island who can deal with them." He had already thought about it. If he couldn't handle it himself, he would immediately bring Bai Changchun back. He was not afraid of who. Nongju was stunned and asked in surprise, "Who?" Nanming Ancestor also couldn't help asking, "Is it Wen Lanfeng?" Yu Qianqiu's mouth curled up into a smirk and said, "Much more powerful than Wen Lanfeng." It turned out that he was already prepared. No wonder he was not in a hurry. Nongju and Nanming Ancestor looked at each other and asked at the same time, "Who is it?" "You will know when the time comes." Hee. I want to give them a surprise. Yu Qianqiu didn't want to be entangled in this topic. He tilted his head and winked at Nanming Ancestor, saying, "Senior Nanming, is this how you treat your guests?" Nanming Ancestor was stunned and looked in the direction he was hinting at. He raised his hand and patted his forehead, saying, my bad. I should have left our distinguished guest aside." He raised his hand and invited, "Jasper Flower Fairy, please come to the island and have a chat." Nongju's expression twitched and she stared at Nanming Ancestor with a twisted face. She was really worried that this old guy had some designs on Jasper Flower Fairy, as Yu Qianqiu had said. Although she didn't want to have anything to do with Jasper Flower Fairy now, she didn't want Nanming Ancestor to have any designs on her. Jasper Flower Fairy bowed to Nanming Ancestor, and then put away the flying celestial device under her feet. They landed on the island. However, from the moment they landed, Jasper Flower Fairy's eyes were fixed on Nongju's face, while Nongju turned her head indifferently. When Patriarch Nanming saw this scene, he snickered. Yu Qianqiu slowly moved backward. Jasper Flower Fairy, with her beautiful hair in a bun, suddenly said, "Should I call you Mr. Nongju or Xiaoyao?" Nongju didn't look back. She snorted and said, "It doesn't matter what you call me. There is no need to call me anything." Jasper Flower Fairy gritted her teeth and said word by word, "You have been lying to me from the beginning." Nongju suddenly turned back and sneered, "This should be applied to you. At the very least, from the moment we met, I told you my real name, and your name is fake. You didn't even give me a chance to find you again." Jasper Flower Fairy gnashed her teeth. Nongju sneered and said, "What's the point of talking about this now? Then give me back my purple dress." Jasper Flower Fairy suddenly shouted. Her voice was so sharp that it shocked Nanming Ancestor and Yu Qianqiu. She was a great beauty after all, but now she didn't care about her image at all. She seemed to be crazy. Hua Rui, who was at the side, knew the relationship between the two, but the other elder of the Moon Clan was dumbfounded. Although he heard something, He couldn't believe that the leader dared to shout at a soul formation cultivator. Nongju said coldly, "Purple dress? Who is Purple dress? I don't know her. Go find someone you know. Don't come to me." You. Jasper Flower Fairy almost went crazy. She wanted to rush up and fight with Nongju. Luckily, Huarui held her back. Jasper Flower Fairy suddenly turned back and shouted, "Yu Qianqiu." She wanted to ask Yu Qianqiu to come out and testify, but Yu Qianqiu didn't see her. Instead, he saw a figure jump into the sea, probably never to show up again. Who else could it be except Yu Qianqiu? When Jasper Flower Fairy mentioned Purple Dress, he felt something was wrong. He didn't want to get involved in the couple's fight. It was better to run away. Besides, he had something to do and it was not convenient for him to stay here. Jasper Flower Fairy was stunned. Then she turned back and loosened her teeth. She begged, "Mr. Nongju, please give me back my purple dress, please." "Humph." Nongju snorted and said, "Purple dress will never go with you. Anyway, I won't let Purple Dress follow the Moon Clan disciples' fate of abandoning their husband and children. Let your women follow the rules of the Moon Clan. Don't drag Purple Dress into it. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." He didn't like the Moon Clan disciples who brought their daughters to the clan and abandoned their sons and husbands when they had sons. Chapter 7:15. Don't worry, I won't let Ziyi join the Moon Clan, nor will I make her follow the rules of the Moon Clan. Give her back to me, I beg you. Goddess Qianghua begged. Nongju said indifferently, "Ziyi doesn't even know who you are. She won't go with you. She also won't like staying with a bunch of women who abandoned their husbands and children. Don't even think about it." These words were like steel needles, stabbing into Qianghua Fairy's heart. She felt like she was struck by lightning and stumbled back a few steps. She asked with a pale face, "You really won't give Ziyi back to me?" Nongju turned around and faced the raging sea. She said indifferently, "Don't ask anymore. Even if you ask me 10,000 times, I won't let Ziyi go with you." "Shameless," Qianghua Fairy said in a trembling voice. "If you don't let her go with me, I'll go find her myself. I'll go to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest to find her myself." "Why don't you try?" Nongju suddenly turned around and said word by word, "If you dare to go find Ziyi, I will flatten the Moon Clan and kill your entire family. This is not a difficult thing for me. I mean what I say. Whether you go find Ziyi or protect your entire Moon Clan, it's up to you." Huarui and the other elders' faces turned pale. Huarui had thought that her sister and brother-in-law could reconcile, and then her brother-in-law could protect the Moon Clan. That would be the best. However, her brother-in-law actually said that he would flatten the Moon Clan. He was very decisive. She said in a trembling voice, "Brother-in-law, you." Before she could finish, Nongju stared at her angrily and shouted, "Shut up. Your brother-in-law is not here. Your Moon Clan is full of heartless women. Is there a brother-in-law? What a joke." Huarui was speechless. Qianghua Fairy sobbed and said, "Xiaoyao, you are so cruel. You want to separate us. That's the best way to describe you in the past." Nongju glared at him and raised the flute on her back. She said indifferently, "If you keep talking, I'll kill two of you right now." Jade Flower Fairy was shocked. There were only two people beside her. Who else could she want to kill? She bit her lip so hard that it bled. She shook her head and looked at Nongju in disbelief. She couldn't believe that the gentle and refined man she had fallen in love with at first sight could actually be so cruel. Resolutely, she turned around and said, "Let's go." A white figure disappeared into the distance. Huarui looked at Nongju and sighed slightly. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. In the end, she followed another elder and flew into the sky to chase after Viburnum Fairy. The salty and humid sea breeze blew endlessly. The two people on the mountain peak stood there silently. Nanming Old Ancestor tugged at his red beard and looked at Nongju, who was deep in thought with her eyes closed, a little embarrassed. After a long time he asked weakly, "Nongju, is she Ziyi's mother?" Nongju closed her eyes and nodded slightly. Nanming Old Ancestor smiled embarrassedly and said, "Nongju, I'm sorry. I didn't know you two had such a relationship. Don't blame me. It was Yu Qianqiu who instigated me to do it. Damn it, he ran away first. By the way, what's going on between you two? Tell me. It's a long story. Let's talk about it when we have time. Nomju opened her eyes and said calmly, I'm worried about the demon domain now. I don't know what Yu Qianqiu is doing. No, I have to go and have a look. As soon as she finished speaking, she had already left quickly. Nanming old ancestor said, Hey! He wanted to ask who the new torture envoy of the demon domain was, but Nomju didn't want to stay a moment longer. Thinking that he was in a bad mood at the moment, she decided to ask him later. Shuntian Island was still windy and sunny. The grass and trees swayed in the wind. In the big house at the center of the island, Yu Qianqiu stood there obediently with his hands behind his back. Lady Mu was really like a virtuous wife as she carefully helped him put on the human skin mask. She didn't know why Yu Qianqiu wanted to wear this thing to change his appearance. Although she had doubts in her heart, after the previous lesson, she knew that she should just do as he said and not ask what she shouldn't ask. If it was something she could know, Mr. would naturally tell her. Compared to the previous one, Mr. was easier to get along with. Unlike the previous one, he didn't even speak to her, let alone act so intimately. He made her tremble with fear all day long, and the days were really hard to bear. Now, as long as she didn't break any taboos, life was still very easy. After putting on the human skin mask, Lady Mu walked around Yu Qianqiu and looked around. After confirming that there were no flaws, she smiled and said, Mister, it's done. It's like you've changed into a different person. As she said this, she took out a clear bronze mirror and showed it to Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu nodded with satisfaction. Lady Mu put away the bronze mirror and helped Yu Qianqiu take off his outer clothes. Then, she helped him put on a set of gray clothes that Yu Qianqiu had prepared in advance. After changing his clothes, Yu Qianqiu sat cross-legged on the ground. Lady Mu loosened his hairband and carefully combed his hair. After straightening his hair, she pulled it all the way to his back and tied it with a silk ribbon around his waist, letting it hang naturally behind him. After everything was done, Yu Qianqiu's appearance had changed completely, and he was completely different from his previous self. He also looked more like a master than before, with a proud and inviolable look. It was just that he seemed to have aged a lot. Lady Mu's eyes were filled with doubt. There was actually someone who didn't like being young, and instead pretended to be old. She didn't know what Mr. was trying to do. Yu Qianqiu saw her doubt and swept the clothes on the mat into his storage bag. He smiled and said, Lady Mu, remember from now on, I'm not called Yu Qianqiu. I'm called Niu Yud. Niu Yud? Lady Mu was stunned. Then she bowed and said, Lady Mu will remember. When Mr. appears with this appearance, you will be called Niu Yud. Smart. Yu Qianqiu gave her a thumbs up and said with a smile, In the demon domain, you're the only one who knows this secret. Don't tell anyone else. Give me some fresh fruits. Hearing that she was the only one in the demon domain who knew this secret, a hint of surprise flashed across Lady Mu's face. Then she quickly brought over a long, short table and placed it in front of Yu Qianqiu with colorful fruits. Yu Qianqiu rubbed his hands and waved them like a tiger in a flock of sheep. Then he began to enjoy the fruits. Lady Mu consciously knelt behind him and massaged his shoulders with just the right amount of strength. After eating and drinking his fill, he didn't know when he fell asleep. His head was pillowed by a pair of elastic thighs. These days were quite comfortable. When the new morning arrived, the sunlight once again shone on the rolling dark clouds of the demon ghost region. A group of more than 100 people quickly flew above the clouds, forming a powerful aura that directly split the dark clouds below, forming a straight line that quickly extended behind the group of people. After they passed, the dark clouds rolled and closed again. There was nothing unusual, but the demons and ghosts below were frightened by the movement above. They had never seen so many powerful experts come to the demon domain together. After a while, the group of over 100 people finally flew past the endless dark clouds. A mirror-like lake appeared in front of them. It was so big that they couldn't see the edge. Everyone's expression became a little serious. They all knew that this was the famous 1,000-mile lake in the demon domain. The former #1 expert in the world lived on a small island in the middle of the lake. This used to be a forbidden area in the entire cultivation world. Few trespassers could survive. Now that everyone had come together, it was equivalent to breaking the rules here. They didn't know how the new master of Obedient Island would react. Everyone was a little nervous, mainly because they didn't know what kind of person the new torture master was. A black dot had already appeared on the surface of the lake far ahead. The three people who were flying at the front exchanged glances and gradually slowed down the speed of the people behind them. They had to restrain themselves before they found out who the new torturer was. Actually, with Pei Fong and the other two's cultivation, they should have arrived long ago. However, in order to come with everyone and increase their sense of security, they had to sacrifice their speed. Obedient Island was like a cat's eye, embedded in the blue and calm surface of the lake. It was quiet and secluded from the rest of the world. However, it was precisely this small island that caused the hundreds of people floating dozens of meters away from the island to feel great psychological pressure. Everyone looked at each other, but no one dared to land on the island first. Finally, everyone's gaze fell on Pei Fong. Pei Fong's expression twitched, but he had no choice. He had to take the lead. Even so, that island still had Bai Changchun's influence, so he didn't dare to trespass. He coughed and said loudly with his fat face shaking, "I heard that a new torture master has been appointed in the demon domain. The lords of the various countries are here to congratulate him." The voice echoed in the sky. While everyone was concentrating on the big house in the center of the island, they heard someone murmuring inside. "Miss Mu, didn't Bai Changchun say that there are rules in the demon ghost territory? Anyone who trespasses can be killed without mercy. Can I go out and kill a few now?" Although the voice wasn't loud, everyone heard it clearly with their cultivation, and they were all shocked. Then, a woman's voice came from inside. "Sir, it's not good for you to kill people right after taking over." There was a woman on Obedient Island? Everyone looked at each other. They didn't know that Miss Mu was on Obedient Island. Damn it. Who's outside? Why are you making so much noise so early in the morning? Can't you let me sleep? A loud curse came from inside the house, and then a majestic and terrifying aura surged out of the house, as if it wanted to devour the whole world. In an instant, it shrouded the hundreds of people in the air dozens of meters away. A series of extreme negative emotions such as indifference, despair, and death intertwined to form a terrifying aura. Even the lords of the various countries, including Pei Fong, couldn't help but shiver. They all moved to resist it before they felt better. Everyone's pupils shrank, and a look of horror appeared on their faces. Oh my God! Is such a terrifying aura still human? Chapter 7:16. Before seeing him, his aura had already seized the opportunity. Everyone became nervous. From the tone of this person's voice, he did not seem to be a kind person. Pei Fong, Qi Jiujuan, and Ouyangde looked at each other speechlessly. They did not know where Bai Changchun had found such a powerful person to take over as the torture envoy. In any case, it was definitely not Wen Lanfeng, because the aura this person exuded was not Wen Lanfeng's aura at all. At this moment, the terrifying aura suddenly and quickly retracted into the house below. Everyone's eyes immediately focused on the door of the big house in the center of the island. They saw a man in gray walking out with his hands behind his back. He squinted at the group of people above and asked indifferently, "Who was shouting here just now?" Judging from the voice, it was the person who had just cursed in the house. Everyone's first reaction was to check this person's cultivation level, but no one could see through it. Therefore, everyone's eyes focused on Pei Fong and the other two, hoping to find some clues from their expressions. However, the three of them were also completely speechless. Everyone was immediately shocked. To be able to make Pei Fong and the other two speechless, this person's cultivation level was obviously higher than theirs. The newly appointed torture master of the demon realm was actually another unfathomable peerless master. How could they live? But who was this person? Why had they never seen him before? Everyone was speechless, their hearts pounding in fear. Yu Qianqiu glanced at everyone expressionlessly and said aggressively, "Are you all mute? Or do you think I'm easier to bully than Bai Changchun?" The gloomy and terrifying aura began to spread from his body again. And it was even more intense, giving people a feeling that he was about to fight. "Niu Yud, he's Niu Yud," someone suddenly said hoarsely in the air. It was none other than the Lord of the Purple Spike Kingdom, Shangguan Taiping. Although the lords present all knew of Niu Yud, none of them had seen him. Even when they were close to each other in the cornucopia, Niu Yud rarely came out, so no one had seen him. Only Shangguan Taiping's disciple, Yulan, had been with Niu Yud for a long time and had reported Niu Yud's general appearance. After seeing this person's appearance, coupled with Niu Yud's signature terrifying aura, he immediately determined that this person was Niu Yud. Most of them had heard about Niu Yud's terrifying aura, and after Shangguan Taiping's reminder, they suddenly realized what was going on, and they were even more shocked. If it was before, they would not have been afraid of him, even if Pei Fong, Ouyangde, and Qi Jujuan gathered together. Unfortunately, before Yin Baikong died, he mentioned that Niu Yud was from the immortal world. The group wanted to cry but had no tears. This Bai Chongqun was too ruthless. Not only did he not want to be the torturer, but he even dragged someone from the celestial world to take over his position. That was too awesome. This fellow was not much better than Bai Chongqun. He had the nickname of Ruthless Judge. Just by listening to his nickname, one could tell that he was not a soft-hearted person. Yu Qianqiu was confused. He pointed at Shangguan Taiping and said, "Who's that? How do you know me? I don't think I've ever seen you before." Shangguan Taiping awkwardly cupped his fist and said with an apologetic smile, "My disciple Yulandu has served you for some time." "Oh, so you're Yulanda's master?" Yu Qianqiu nodded in understanding, as if he knew Yulandu. Pei Fong, who was trying his best to shrink his body to make himself less conspicuous, immediately cupped his fist and said with a smile, "So it's Senior Niu who has taken over the position of the Demon Realm Torturer. This is the blessing of the cultivation world. We've come to congratulate you. I hope we didn't disturb you." Yu Qianqiu's gaze swept over. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Damn fatty, I can tell that you're the one who was yelling just now. A mere late-stage soul formation cultivator dares to come here and yell? I think you must be tired of living." His words were filled with a murderous aura. Pei Fong was so scared that his heart was trembling. He wanted to cry but no tears came out. "When did I yell? I was just greeting him politely. Don't be unreasonable just because you have a higher cultivation, okay?" However, he could only keep his words to himself. The other party was so unreasonable. If he said it out loud, he would really be tired of living. Hence, he tried his best to put on an amiable smile and waved his hands. "Senior Niu, you've misunderstood us. We're only here to congratulate you on becoming the torturer. We really didn't yell. Perhaps I was too excited to see you just now, so I spoke a little too loudly and disturbed your peace. Please forgive me, Senior. No wonder this damn fatty could live until now. He was really flexible and shameless." Yu Qianqiu glared at him and said indifferently, "I've misunderstood? Is there something wrong with my ears?" No. Pei Fong waved his hands repeatedly. "Senior, you have an immortal body. How could there be something wrong with your ears? I was born with a loud voice. Please forgive me, Senior." Many people looked at Pei Fong with sympathy and pity. This guy had always been reasonable when he met the strong. He had always been unreasonable when he met the weak. Now he was the one getting his comeuppance. Hearing him say that, Yu Qianqiu's expression softened. He snorted and said, "I knew it. People always praise me for being wise and powerful. How could I have misunderstood them?" Everyone was speechless. This Niu Yud was a fool who liked to listen to flattery. Pei Fong's eyes brightened, and the fat on his face trembled. He gestured with his hands and feet as he said passionately, "Senior is not only wise and mighty, you are also a jade tree in the wind, a peerless genius that surpasses the ancients and dazzles the contemporaries." Before he could finish flattering Niu Yud, he could not continue. He saw that Niu Yud was staring at him coldly, as if he was looking at a fool. "Damn fatty, do you think I'm as stupid as you? How dare you use such words to fool me? Are you tired of living?" Yu Qianqiu asked in a low voice. Pei Fong was immediately dumbfounded. Many of the feudal lords' faces turned red as they tried to hold back their laughter. This Niu Yud was temperamental. He was really hard to please. Pei Fong's shameless act was completely useless. He was probably going to be out of luck today. Just then, a woman in white walked out of the house. She held a fruit platter in her hands. There were fresh fruits of different colors on the platter. The fruit platter was placed in front of Yu Qianqiu. She smiled and said, "Mister, eat some fruits to calm down. There's no need to lower yourself to their level." Everyone took a closer look and realized that she was actually a tree demon. Her appearance was not bad, but she was not stunning. Yu Qianqiu plucked a grape from the fruit platter and tossed it into his mouth. As he chewed, he asked, "Lady Mu, how does Bai Changchun deal with these trespassers?" Everyone was shocked. If they really dealt with them according to Bai Changchun's method, everyone would be out of luck. Hence, everyone looked at Lady Mu with pleading gazes, hoping that she would be merciful. Especially Pei Fong, whose face was filled with anticipation. Lady Mu's beautiful gaze swept across everyone. She smiled at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Mister, there are exceptions to everything. Moreover, these people are here to congratulate Mister on taking over the position of torture envoy. Speaking of which, they have good intentions. There's nothing wrong with that. Why don't you be merciful and let them off this time? If they dare to trespass again, you can deal with them according to the old rules. What do you think?" Everyone immediately looked at Lady Mu with gratitude. Then they looked at Niu Yud anxiously. "Oh." Yu Qianqiu raised his eyebrows. He plucked another grape and tossed it into his mouth. After chewing a few times, he spat out the skin and reached out to touch Lady Mu's fragrant shoulder. His palm slid under her neck. He pinched her chin and asked with a smile, "Why are you siding with an outsider? Have you taken a liking to one of them? Otherwise, why would you speak up for them?" Lady Mu immediately knelt down in fear. Trembling, she said, "Mister, please understand. Lady Mu has never seen them before. How could I have taken a liking to them? Lady Mu is really thinking of Mister wholeheartedly. If Mister doesn't believe me, I'm willing to die to prove my sincerity." She was still smiling just a moment ago, but now she was trembling in fear. Everyone who saw this felt a chill run down their spines. From her actions, it could be seen that this Niu Yud was definitely a murderous and temperamental person. Otherwise, this woman wouldn't be so frightened. Many of them wanted to escape. However, no one wanted to take the risk until the last moment, because no one was confident that they could escape from the hands of this person from the immortal world. The scene of Yin Baikong dying at the hands of the underworld messenger was still fresh in everyone's mind. "Ha! Look at what you're saying. How can I bear to let you die? Get up." Niu Yud personally helped the kneeling Lady Mu up. Then he tilted his head to look at the crowd and said indifferently, "Today, for the sake of my maidservant, I'll let you off. However, if anyone dares to barge in again, it means that they don't respect me. When that time comes, it'll be useless no matter who begs for mercy." "We don't dare, we don't dare," everyone replied timidly. They finally heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that they had passed today. Speaking of which, they really had to thank this tree demon called Lady Mu. Unexpectedly, Niu Yud snorted coldly again and said, "But rules are rules. You have to pay the price for breaking them. Otherwise, how can I maintain my prestige as a torture envoy? If word gets out, won't people laugh at me for being inferior to Bai Changchun?" Everyone's hearts were in their throats again. They didn't know what price he wanted them to pay. They stared nervously at Niu Yud, who lowered his head and pondered. "How about this?" Yu Qianqiu suddenly raised his head and looked at the crowd. He said sinisterly, "According to the number of people, each of you will pay 200 million upper-grade spirit stones. Those who pay can scram. Those who don't, leave your life behind." Then he said to Lady Mu, "Since you've pleaded for mercy for them, you'll be the one to collect the money. 200 million upper-grade spirit stones per person in exchange for their life?" The various feudal lords looked at each other. They recalled Niu Yud's past of swindling money from the ghost manor. They finally confirmed that this fellow was someone who loved money. Yes. Lady Mu bowed and accepted the order. She rose into the air and flew in front of Pei Fong. She looked at Pei Fong without saying anything. It was as if she was telling him to do as he saw fit. The fat on Pei Fong's face twitched. 200 million upper-grade spirit stones was too much. However, when he saw Nyoyid staring at him coldly from below, a chill ran down his spine. He immediately squeezed out a smile and took out a storage bag. He offered it with both hands and said, "Thank you, miss. Here are 200 million upper-grade spirit stones. Please take a look." Chapter 717. The price was a little high, but compared to his life, and he could afford it, 200 million high-grade spirit stones was really not a lot. However, he felt very aggrieved. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have come all the way here to pay for humiliation. Wait! Everyone was shocked and looked at the person who spoke. All of them were shocked. At first, they felt the pain of paying such a large sum of money, but now, they were worried that Nyoyid would go back on his words. Nyoyid pointed at Pei Fong and said, "He is the leader. He was loud and disturbed my sleep, so he is an exception. I will add another 100 million high-grade spirit stones. Everyone else is the same." He was really overbearing. However, Yu Qianqiu naturally had his own thoughts. Some people, they needed to be taught a lesson, especially these thick-skinned, black-hearted and sly old foxes. If you pretended that nothing had happened and let them go for nothing, they might suspect that you had a guilty conscience. In the end, they might turn around and repeatedly test you. Towards these people, he had to maintain an appropriate amount of pressure to make them feel fear and pressure, not giving them the chance to think nonsense. He had to put on a high profile and clearly let them understand that he was more powerful than them and could take their lives at any time. The more he pressured them, the more they would be afraid of him. Of course, there had to be a limit to pressuring them. He couldn't force them to do something desperate. Therefore, he chose Pei Fong to make an example out of him. He couldn't pick a pushover at this time. By suppressing the most powerful one, he would naturally scare the others. As for why he wanted each of them to take out 200 million high-grade spirit stones, it was because when Yu Qianqiu was on Xianxian Island, he found close to 800 million high-grade spirit stones in the storage bags of Hua Zongming, and the other two. It seemed that Hua Zongming and the others weren't the most powerful among the feudal lords. If they could carry so much money with them, these people definitely couldn't be any worse. Yu Qianqiu did an average calculation and estimated that each of them could take out 200 million. After all, these people were not ordinary cultivators but local moneybags. Although a mere 1 or 200 million was a huge amount, it was not enough to hurt these local moneybags. Therefore, they should be willing to take out their money to save their lives. When Pei Fong heard that he wanted to add another 100 million, his expression became complicated. No matter how rich he was, it wasn't easy money that he picked up from the streets. Asking him to take out another 100 million just like that would be painful. After all, it wasn't 1 or 2 million but 100 million. People were different. Pei Fong was Pei Fong, not Yin Baikong. If it was Yin Baikong, he would probably take the initiative to give another 100 million, and he would even find an opportunity to send more money in the future. He wasn't afraid of Nyoyid asking, he was afraid that Nyoyid wouldn't accept. Seeing him hesitate, Lady Mu turned to look at Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu raised his eyebrows and said expressionlessly, "Damn fatty, you're not willing?" Pei Fong was startled and smiled awkwardly. I'm willing. Very quickly, he took out another storage pouch and offered it with both hands. He really refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. After Lady Mu finished counting, she went to Qi Jiujuan who was standing beside him. Qi Jiujuan silently took out a storage pouch. Therefore, it was Ouyangda's turn again. These three standing at the front were naturally the unluckiest. They set an example for the people behind them and took out their money. Yu Qianqiu was secretly delighted. This was a huge amount of wealth. However, on the surface he said expressionlessly, "Those who paid scram. Don't wait for me to change my mind and regret it." Needless to say, these three late-stage soul formation cultivators didn't want to stay here anymore. Pei Fong smiled with his bleeding face, cupped his hands and said, "It's my honor to be able to meet Senior Niu today. We will take our leave now. Before you leave, listen carefully. From now on, I will take over by Changchun's matters. If anyone violates the old rules, they won't be as easy to talk to as they did today. Yu Qianqiu waved his sleeve and shouted, "Scram!" The three of them nodded speechlessly. Then they shot into the sky and quickly flew away. After these three people took out their money and left, the others didn't have any temper. They all prepared their spirit stones in advance and waited for Lady Mu to come and collect the money. Those who paid hurriedly ran away. No one dared to stay. Who knew if this fickle Niu Yud would go back on his words? Therefore, some people even took the initiative to pay first and then quickly leave. There were fewer and fewer people around. Some people were even shocked because they didn't have enough spirit stones with them. They hurriedly found someone to borrow them. If they were too late and everyone left, who could they borrow money from? That could kill people. Not long after, the feudal lords who came with ulterior motives didn't get to see the excitement they were looking forward to. Instead, they were all ruthlessly slaughtered. The most unbearable thing was that they took out their own money and gave it away for free. They even had to say thank you to the woman who collected the money. How could they endure this? As a result, they walked away with their faces covered in grime. When Yu Qianqiu saw that the sky had returned to its tranquil state, he returned to the large house, feeling very pleased with himself. Then he sat down on the mat. Not long after, he saw Lady Mu come in with a large cloth bag. She placed it in front of him and opened it, immediately revealing a large pile of storage bags. Lady Mu looked at Yu Qianqiu with respect. She really admired him. It turned out that Mr.'s name, Niu Yud, was so famous outside. He could scare so many soul formation experts to this extent. It was obvious how powerful his hidden cultivation was. It was no wonder that he could take over the demon domain. She had always thought that Yu Qianqiu had hidden his profound cultivation, but she didn't know that there was another reason. You put on a good show today. Yu Qianqiu first praised Lady Mu. Then he looked at the pile of storage bags and rubbed his hands excitedly. How many are there in total? Lady Mu came back to her senses and said with a smile. There are a total of 133 people. 200 million for each person. Together with the extra 100 million from that fatty, it's a total of 26. 7 billion superior grade spirit stones. Wah! Yu Qianqiu laughed wildly. He suddenly pounced on the storage bags and gave them a warm hug. He almost burst into tears. I'm rich. This demon domain torturer is really poor. When Bai Changchun left, he didn't leave a single spirit stone behind. Now he suddenly became rich. Yu Qianqiu, who was lying on the storage bag, really felt sorry for his master. With his master's ability, he could easily extort 1 billion from each of the countries. A few hundred countries would be hundreds of billions. However, his master was too pure. Otherwise, his successor would be the richest man in the world. What a pity! After the excitement, Yu Qianqiu sat back in his original position. He stared at the pile of storage bags in front of him and shook his head with a sigh. What a pity! Only about 100 out of more than 300 lords came. If all of them were here, we would have made a fortune. Lady Mu chuckled and thought to herself, Sir is too greedy. But it's not bad to have so many. Yu Qianqiu pointed to the storage bags in front of him and said, Take one. As the housekeeper of Obedient Island, how can she not have money? Lady Mu was stunned. She knew that it was not good to disobey Yu Qianqiu's words. Hence she thanked him and took one. Then Yu Qianqiu waved his hand, and the pile of storage bags in front of him disappeared. They went to the Utopia treasury guarded by Bai Suzhen. At this moment, the sound of someone flying quickly came from the sky. Someone had landed on Obedient Island. Lady Mu did not think much of it because she believed that with Sir's abilities, what couldn't he handle? However, Yu Qianqiu's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. He was worried that some of the deity transformation stage lords had noticed something was amiss and had returned to settle the score with him. While he was worrying, a person had already appeared at the door. It was none other than Nongzhu. When Nongzhu saw Yu Qianqiu, she and Yu Qianqiu were stunned at the same time. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He wondered why Nongzhu had rushed over. Had the matter with Viburnum Fairy been resolved so quickly? Nongzhu was shocked when she saw Niu Yud. Then she remembered that Niu Yud was Yu Qianqiu. You, Why are you here? Yu Qianqiu wanted to ask him about the matter with Viburnum Fairy, but he changed his words. Nongzhu's gaze paused on Lady Mu for a moment, and her eyes became a little sharp. Seeing that she was sitting so close to Yu Qianqiu, she seemed a little unhappy. It was not because she was worried that there would be an ambiguous relationship between them, but because when Bai Changchun was here, this woman did not dare to come into the house easily. Did she become unruly after Bai Changchun left? In Nongzhu's subconscious, Obedient Island and this house represented Bai Changchun, and no one could blaspheme them. Lady Mu naturally knew that Nongzhu's status in Obedient Island was not ordinary, and she was not an outsider. Being stared at by Yu Qianqiu, she felt a little guilty and hurriedly got up. She bowed to Nongzhu and said, "Sir, I'll go out first." She turned around and bowed to Nongzhu, and then walked out quickly. Nongzhu looked back coldly, and then stared at Yu Qianqiu and snorted. "Don't lose the dignity of the torture envoy of the demon ghost region." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand disapprovingly and said, "I don't have the ability to maintain my dignity. Why don't I pass the position of torture envoy to you now?" "Don't talk nonsense here." Nongzhu sat next to him angrily. Looking around at the quiet surroundings, she asked suspiciously, "Where are Pei Fong and the others? Didn't they come?" "They came. I just drove them away not long ago," Yu Qianqiu said proudly. "You drove them away? Don't talk nonsense." Nongzhu suddenly came to her senses. She pointed at Yu Qianqiu's face and said, "You scared them away with the identity of Niu Yid? How could this work?" "It doesn't matter what method I used. As long as it can solve the problem, it's a good method," Yu Qianqiu said proudly. He decided to keep the matter of making a fortune a secret for the time being. Otherwise, he was afraid that this old man would blackmail him. Nongzhu thought for a while and nodded slowly, saying, "It seems that I worried too much. But this is also good. After the news that Niu Yid has taken over the demon ghost region is spread, at least for a period of time, no one dares to disturb the demon ghost region. I can also make use of this time to seize the opportunity." Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu asked curiously, "Seize the opportunity for what?" Nongzhu was silent for a while and said, "I'm going to do closed-door training for a period of time." Chapter 7:18. Yu Qianqiu laughed. His master was right. This old man had finally made up his mind to break through his cultivation. "That's not right." Nongzhu suddenly slapped her thigh and pointed at Yu Qianqiu's nose. "With your cultivation, we left Xian Island right after each other. How did you arrive at the demon region before me? There must be something behind this. Tell me honestly." Yu Qianqiu was startled. This was really hard to explain. He did come back before Yu Qianqiu, and not just a little bit earlier. He had already slept soundly on the lap of a beauty. He rubbed his nose and smiled. "I've cultivated a magic art for escaping. I'm good at speed. That's why I came back earlier than you." Since he couldn't explain it clearly, he could only use self-deprecation to keep it a secret. Nongzhu looked at him from head to toe. She said doubtfully, "No wonder you're so good at escaping. What magic art is it? Tell me." You'll know when you have the chance." Yu Qianqiu smiled perfunctorily. Seeing that he didn't want to tell her, Nongzhu didn't turn on him. She stood up and stared at him in silence for a while. Then she said slowly, "I trust Bai Changchun's judgment. You'll have to rely on yourself from now on." She took out a jade archive and threw it to Yu Qianqiu. "I've set up a message formation in the purple bamboo forest. There are coordinates in the jade archive. You can look for me if you need anything. At least, I won't leave the purple bamboo forest for a while." "You're going back to the South Sea now?" Yu Qianqiu stood up and followed Nongzhu to the door. After stepping out of the door, Nongzhu said with a serious expression, "Once Bai Changchun leaves, you won't be able to hold on for long. Sooner or later, you'll be exposed. I have to calm down and break through my cultivation to protect myself. If one day the demon region really, at least the purple bamboo forest in the South Sea can be your home." Yu Qianqiu laughed and said, "I'm not as pessimistic as you think, am I?" Nongzhu didn't want to argue with him, so she raised her hand and said, "Be careful, I'm leaving." "Wait." Yu Qianqiu stopped him and took out 2 storage pouches. These are gifts for Zi and Furong, one for each of them. Nongzhu was startled when she received it. She then injected her divine sense into it to see what it was. After seeing it, she was stunned for a long time, and the muscles on her face twitched. There were 200 million high-grade spirit stones in each of the 2 storage bags. This was the first time he had seen someone give money to a woman as a gift. Moreover, he was very generous, giving 400 million high-grade spirit stones in one go. Nongzhu gradually came to her senses. She gritted her teeth and asked, "Tell me honestly, how much money do you have?" Yu Qianqiu waved his hand disapprovingly and said, "It's not a lot, it's just so. It should be enough to spend in this lifetime. If it's not enough, I'll just earn more." Nongzhu was speechless. The SOSO from this money grubber's mouth must be a frighteningly huge amount. It was better not to know, lest she was provoked. He was a rich man. He watched as Yu Qianqiu took out another jade archive and inserted something into it. Then he took out 2 porcelain bottles and handed them to Miao Yi, saying, "One of the bottles contains the limit-breaking pill, and the other contains the 7 treasures pill. There's a method to use it in this jade archive. Help me bring it to Furong. It can help her raise her cultivation level to the early stage of tribulation passing." Nongzhu took it and asked suspiciously, "Didn't you say that this thing can poison people to death? Why did you give it to Furong?" Although he knew that Yu Qianqiu wouldn't harm Furong, he still had doubts and couldn't help asking. "There are real and fake pills," Yu Qianqiu explained weakly. Nongzhu suddenly became furious and said, "How dare you sell fake pills to harm people?" Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes and said, "Which eye of yours saw me sell fake pills? You can't talk nonsense. You go." Nongzhu was so angry that she flung her sleeve and flew away. Looking at the black dot disappearing into the horizon, Yu Qianqiu shook his head and smiled bitterly. Then he frowned and continued strolling. A cool breeze caressed his face, and the grass was fragrant. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the edge of the 1,000 Miles Lake. Looking at the sparkling surface of the lake, he couldn't help but be startled. His eyes turned, and no one knew what he was thinking. Without hesitation, he jumped into the lake. Splash! Water splashed on the surface of the lake, creating ripples. His figure disappeared from the surface of the lake. Under the water, Yu Qianqiu occasionally spat out a string of bubbles from the corner of his mouth. He dived headfirst into the bottom of the lake. The water was clear, and schools of fish could be seen swimming in the lake. Some of the bolder fishes even ran over to play around him as he dived, diving down with him. After diving for nearly 100 meters, the light in the water gradually weakened, and it became dark in front of him. The water pressure was getting stronger and stronger. The fish following him didn't seem to be deep water fish. They all swung their tails and swam back upstream. Yu Qianqiu also felt a little uncomfortable. He pointed his finger downward and began to use the water formula. The surrounding water quickly separated, and his whole body seemed to be wrapped in a bubble, sinking rapidly. The surroundings became darker and darker, so dark that not a single ray of light could be seen. The surroundings were extremely quiet, giving people a terrifying sense of oppression. Yu Qianqiu himself didn't know how deep he had dived. He estimated that it was about 1,000 meters. He felt that using the water formula to repel the water pressure was also getting stronger and stronger. The huge pressure around him kept squeezing, and he gradually felt that he couldn't bear it. It was obvious that with his current cultivation, it would be difficult for him to withstand too much pressure when using the water art. Fortunately, the water formula was miraculous. It could strip the oxygen contained in the water for him to breathe. Otherwise, it would be even more uncomfortable. Just as he was hesitating whether to give up, a faint white light appeared below him. Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up. It seemed that he was not far from the target he wanted to check out. He gritted his teeth, endured the pressure, and dived deeper. The light below grew bigger and bigger, but his face was also flushed red. The pressure was too great, and he couldn't bear it. But he still persisted. When he started to feel dizzy, Yu Qianqiu didn't dare to go any further. Looking down, the target was only about 100 meters away from him. Unfortunately, the pressure was too great, and he couldn't get close at all. This was also because he could use the water formula to repel the water. Otherwise, with his cultivation, he wouldn't be able to reach this position. At the bottom of the tranquil lake lay a serene pearl. Under the backdrop of the darkness, it emitted a gentle white light, illuminating the surrounding topography of the lake. There were rare deep-water fishes leisurely swimming around. Rather than calling it a pearl, it was more like an upside-down bowl. It was white and smooth like jade, but in reality, it was just a light barrier. This light barrier at the bottom of the lake was at least a few hundred meters wide and 100 meters tall. It was in a semicircular arc. From the surrounding topography, it could be seen that this place was originally a valley. The surrounding shadows rose and fell like a mountain range. Not far away, there was a tall, round pillar-like mountain. Yu Qianqiu looked up the pillar-like mountain and was immediately shocked. Judging from the direction, this should be the lowest base of Obedient Island. He felt that it was a little strange. Most mountains were cone-shaped. How could a mountain grow like this? The circumference of the top and bottom was about the same, and it was as straight as a pillar. Furthermore, this height wasn't low. It was at least 2 kilometers, right? Such a scene couldn't help but make people think of the wooden fish, and the wooden mallet used to strike it. The light barrier was like a wooden fish, and the pillar supporting Obedient Island was like the wooden mallet used to strike it. How could there be such a strange topography? Yu Qianqiu was puzzled no matter how he thought about it. After hesitating for a while, Yu Qianqiu felt like his ears were ringing and the dizziness was getting stronger. The distance between him and the water had already shrunk to less than half a foot. If he stayed any longer, he would be in danger. Yu Qianqiu looked down at the light barrier and shook his head in pity. According to Bai Changchun, the entrance to the demon realm was sealed by the Immortal Emperor and the Underworld King, and the light barrier was a seal that the Myriad Swords demon monarch added later on. In other words, the entrance to the demon realm was sealed by 2 seals. Even with Bai Changchun's cultivation, he couldn't break through the outer layer of the Myriad Swords demon monarch's seal. Yu Qianqiu originally wanted to see if he could go in, but he didn't expect that even approaching would be difficult. After working for a while in vain, Yu Qianqiu helplessly disappeared into the water. A big bubble broke into several pieces and floated up. On the mountainside behind the mountain god temple, where the leaders of the Green Gang and Hong Gang were hiding, Yu Qianqiu stood in front of the plain and stared at the mountain god temple below. Because of the raging war in Wuxia, Shi Wenguang's army had already reached the vicinity. The common people were in a panic and didn't dare to go out. Thus, the mountain god temple seemed very deserted. Gu Qingyun and Hong Qi stood behind him and reported the recent developments in Wuxia. 1/3 of Huaxia's territory had already been captured by Shi Wenguang's army, and the poor people who had been oppressed by the imperial court for a long time could no longer bear the corvée labor and taxes brought by the war, so they all formed groups and rose up in rebellion. For a time, the uprising of the poor people was like a spark that started a prairie fire, making the precariously dynasty even worse. If there was no strong support, the dynasty would collapse, and defeat would be set in stone. On Wuxia Island, the forces of various countries increased the mobilization of manpower, and a large number of cultivators continuously gathered on Wuxia Island. In the other countries that were adjacent to Huaxia, there were also a large number of cultivators gathering. Other than the direction of the Demon Ghost region, they had already surrounded Huaxia. Looking at the movements, the forces of various countries were preparing to launch a large-scale attack on Huaxia's cultivation world. The entire Huaxia's cultivation world was as anxious as ants on a hot pan. All of this was within Yu Qianqiu's expectations. With Bai Changchun gone, the various countries would definitely officially make their move. Master, I heard that our Grandmaster is the #1 expert in the world who has already gone to the East Holy Land? Hong Qi's eyes suddenly lit up as he interrupted. Yu Qianqiu made a non-committal end sound, and Hong Qi instantly revealed an extremely annoyed expression. It seemed like he was blaming his master for not bringing him to meet his Grandmaster, but he did not dare to be presumptuous in front of his master. Gu Qingyun glanced at Hong Qi and continued to report. All the sects in Huaxia are in danger, and they're all worried that the soul formation experts of various countries are about to make their move. Also, there are quite a number of cultivators in our two sects, so we should also prepare early to avoid being implicated when the time comes. You're worrying too much. Yu Qianqiu thought for a while and said, some time ago, the new torture master of the demon ghost region, Niu Yud, already warned them that the soul formation experts of various countries don't dare to come to Wuxia for the time being. Think of a way to spread this news, so that the various sects can prepare for war with peace of mind. Don't make it so that they surrender before the fight even starts. Anyway, they're all tired of living. If there's something wrong with their cultivation, it's better to die a little more. Chapter 719. Gu Qingyan and Hongqi looked at each other. Then Yu Qianqiu continued. If they fight, as long as they don't provoke you, don't get involved. Anyway, your subordinates are all wandering itinerant cultivators. They don't have a fixed territory and are just making a living in the cracks. No matter who wins, you won't get any benefits. So, don't be used by them. Who cares who wins or loses? Continue being bandits. Yes. There's nothing bad about being a bandit. Freedom. You don't have to listen to others and you'll still have food to eat. The two of them looked at each other speechlessly again. Gu Qingyan coughed and said, Boss, the 10,000 demons in Moon Sect seem to be sending people to look for you. Let them look for them. Yu Qianqiu didn't think much of it. I promised to help them deal with the soul formation experts who came to bully us. But the soul formation experts haven't attacked us yet. What's the point of looking for them? I can't be bothered with them. After giving instructions to the two of them, Yu Qianqiu returned to Utopia directly. He stood alone in a remote area and closed his eyes in deep thought. After a long time, he opened his eyes with a puzzled look, and his brows furrowed into a deep furrow. There was something that worried him. He didn't know what was going on with Bai Changchun in the East Holy Land. He searched for Bai Changchun's location in the East Holy Land several times, but he actually stopped at the same place and didn't move at all. He didn't know if it was because of the special environment in the East Holy Land or because Bai Changchun was trapped. Either situation was easy to explain. He was just afraid that Bai Changchun had met with an accident and died. His worried gaze gradually became determined. He decided to take the risk and go to the East Holy Land to see what was going on with Bai Changchun. Otherwise, how could a living person not move for a long time? It couldn't be that he went to the East Holy Land to meditate, right? That was too nonsensical. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xian disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, Yu Qianqiu quickly looked around vigilantly. If something was wrong, he would immediately flash back. However, what he saw and heard in front of his eyes left him in shock. The sun was shining brightly in front of him, and the salty sea breeze was blowing gently. Waves were crashing against the shore in front of him, and the tide was rising on the white beach beside him. All of this indicated that he was standing by the seaside. Not far behind him, there were even some cacti that were as tall as a human growing on the slope. Carefully observing his surroundings, Yu Qianqiu became more and more confused the more he looked. He scratched his head in puzzlement. Could this be the legendary Holy East Land that was said to be extremely dangerous? The sea view is not bad. His gaze suddenly landed on an island in the distance. The more he looked at it, the more familiar it seemed. No matter how he looked at it, it looked like old ancestor Nanming's Xianxian Island. Holy East Lands? Xianxian Island? When Yu Qianqiu came to his senses, he was stunned. Could this be the Eastern Holy Land opposite Xianxian Island? After observing for a long time, he finally confirmed that he was standing in the Eastern Holy Land opposite Xianxian Island. It was probably because of the formation that sealed the Eastern Holy Land. When looking from Xianxian Island, it was a vast expanse of whiteness, but when looking from the inside, it was as clear as day. This was similar to the defensive formations used by some cultivation sections. However, the strange thing was that he did not see Bai Changchun nearby, but he could clearly sense that the silver ball he had given him was here. Otherwise, he would not have been able to teleport here. In order to accurately lock onto the location of the silver ball, Yu Qianqiu returned to Utopia once again. In the blink of an eye, he appeared where he had disappeared, but this time, he was 2 meters away from his original position. Yu Qianqiu stared at the white beach under his feet in a daze. His expression became abnormally terrified, and in the blink of an eye, he saw large droplets of tears flowing down his face. He suddenly cried out in grief, "Master! Who did this to you?" He immediately knelt on the ground and began to frantically dig the sand. After digging more than a meter deep, he dug out a storage bag from the hole. He continued to dig with all his might, but he could not find anything. After a while, he sat down weakly in the 2-meter-deep hole, hugging the storage bag as tears flowed down his face silently. He did not know what kind of expert Bai Changchun had encountered, to the point where even his corpse could not be found. If there had not been an accident, with Bai Changchun's cultivation, how could he have lost his belongings like a 3-year-old child? After feeling sad for a while, he wiped away his tears and rummaged through the storage bag. He wanted to see if his master, the world's #1 expert, had left behind any valuable inheritance. This was what he thought. After all, the dead had passed away, and the living had to continue living well. If the dead could leave behind any treasures for the living, it would also be a form of comfort for the living. However, he was greatly disappointed to find that his master was as poor as ever. He only poured out the 10 or so small silver balls and a jade archive that he had given him. He did not expect the world's #1 expert to die so cleanly. However, when he saw the jade archive, his eyes lit up again. He guessed that the jade archive contained some kind of peerless cultivation method. Even if it was Bai Changchun's own cultivation method, it would be enough for him to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. Lying on the beach and basking in the sun, he crossed his legs and hummed a crooked song. There's no drunken sunset in the coconut grove, just a sea of blue, sunshine, beach waves, cacti, and an old captain. After singing it many times, he suddenly stopped and got up. He patted his butt and looked around. He sneered and said, "You're relaxed after throwing me the burden. No way. No matter how big the Holy Land is, it's only this big. I don't believe I can't find you." He looked around and suddenly landed on the cactus that covered the sand. His eyes lit up, and he clicked his tongue. "This thing doesn't exist in Utopia, but I can dig some back and plant them. It'll add to the scenery." He got to work immediately. The black fire saber appeared in his hand. He dug a few of them and moved them back to Utopia. When he dug the 6th one, he stabbed the saber into the sand. Suddenly, a red liquid shot out from the place where the saber was inserted, spraying him all over. "Damn it! What's this?" Before he could finish speaking, he smelled a strong stench. He was furious. Since he had already dirted himself, he stabbed the black fire saber into the ground. Every time he stabbed, a stream of red liquid would shoot out from the place where the saber was inserted. Such a demonic action was more or less a way to vent his anger. Bai Changchun's departure without saying goodbye had indeed made him a little unhappy. But at this moment, the ground under his feet suddenly shook violently, causing him to lose his balance. Suddenly, he felt that the ground was much higher, and there were roars coming from below. What was that? Yu Qianqiu was instantly dumbfounded. He tried his best to stabilize his body, not knowing what was below. Suddenly, 3 thick, black, vine-like things shot out from the sand within a radius of a dozen meters. They were wriggling toward him. Yu Qianqiu's gaze turned cold. He waved the black saber in his hand and destroyed them like they were mud. The stench of red liquid splattered everywhere, and chunks of things fell from the ground. The rest quickly retreated back into the sand. In the end, the roars from below became even louder. F***CK. When Yu Qianqiu was angry, there was no reasoning. He had always believed in striking first to gain the upper hand. He had already determined that there was definitely a monster below. He stabbed the saber in, not even reaching the saber handle. Fresh red and smelly blood spurted out. Yu Qianqiu pulled out the saber, and a ball of fierce black flames appeared on the saber. He had used the black flame to burn the blade. Woo-woo. A deafening howl came from below. The violent tremors caused the ground to sink, and then it suddenly rose up, throwing Yu Qianqiu into the air. Yu Qianqiu, who was in the air, was covered in blood. He held the black fire saber in his hand and stared down like a god of death. Chapter 720. Sand flew up like rain, and a huge monster popped out from the sand. For a moment, it was hard to see what it was, but more than a dozen huge tentacles stabbed at Yu Qianqiu in the air. Yu Qianqiu quickly flew out, but after flying for a short distance his expression changed. He felt that while he was using his cultivation, the true essence in his body was being consumed several times. Alarmed, he quickly landed on a sand dune dozens of meters away. At this time, he did not have time to investigate the reason for the rapid consumption of true essence in his body. He turned around and stared at the monster that popped out from the sand. He saw that after the monster popped out of the air and spread its tentacles, its arm span was almost more than 30 meters. It was like a big umbrella opened in the air, setting off a storm of sand that fell from the sky. Big octopus? Yu Qianqiu looked at the big guy that popped up in the air, and then fell down stunned. The monster with more than a dozen huge tentacles looked very much like an octopus, but it seemed that an ordinary octopus did not have so many tentacles, nor was it so big. The strangest thing was that its body seemed to be covered with black scales the size of a palm. After letting out two painful howls, the big guy fell straight from the air and smashed into the sand, motionless. One of the huge tentacles fell 2 meters in front of Yu Qianqiu. At the end of the tentacle, there was a sharp black claw that looked like a fang. A burst of black smoke came out from the top of the big octopus's head, and its huge body was withering at a visible speed. Then it spread to the dozen or so huge tentacles. Not long after, the huge monster turned into a pile of ashes on the sand. This was the terrible result of being burned by the black fire. Yu Qianqiu did not know whether this big guy was an octopus or not. In any case, he did not know what kind of monster it was. He looked at the black fire extinguished saber in his hand with a dignified gaze. Using the fire spell to maintain the saber did not consume much true essence, but now that he carefully examined it, he found that the true essence consumption was greater than usual. At first, he did not notice anything unusual, but when he fiercely circulated his true essence while flying, he found that something was wrong. Previously, he had thought that it was the monster's doing, but now that the monster was dead, he discovered that revolving the fire art to maintain the saber was still consuming his quintessential essence. Clearly, it had nothing to do with the monster. What the hell was going on? Yu Qianqiu looked around suspiciously, but didn't find anything unusual, so he put away the broadsword. As a result, Yu Qianqiu stared blankly for a moment before suddenly shooting up into the sky. After circling twice in the air, he suddenly understood everything and quickly landed on the ground. It turned out that as long as he used his cultivation technique, he would discover that there was an unknown force in the world that was quietly extracting the true essence from his body. The more true essence he used, the more true essence would be extracted from his body. In short, the consumption was proportional to the extracted true essence, which was 1-to-1. In other words, the consumption of true essence to execute a technique here was double that of outside. Yu Qianqiu found it hard to understand. How could such a strange thing happen in the same world? Could it be because of the heaven and earth great formation that sealed the eastern Holy Land? Just as he was puzzled, he saw a cloud of dust billowing in the distance. There were more than 10 people riding fast horses galloping on the sandy ground, galloping towards him at high speed. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head in confusion. Weren't the people sealed in the eastern Holy Land the experts of the netherworld and immortal world? Why were they riding horses at such a tortoise-like speed? In a short while more than 10 people arrived in front of him. They slowed down and circled around him. Yu Qianqiu sized them up in surprise. It seemed that their expressions weren't very friendly, and they were staring at him with hostility. However, what made him feel the most strange was that these people were obviously mortals. They were very different from the experts in the Eastern Holy Land he had imagined. The more than 10 people on horseback all had strong and sturdy bodies. They had bronze-colored skin and were very muscular. Their long hair was tied into many whips, and they even wore feathers on their heads. Their necks and wrists were adorned with animal tooth jewelry. Most of the skin on their bodies was exposed, and only some of the important parts were covered with cloth. On their waists were crudely cast knives, and there were even some who carried animal tooth spears on their backs. These people's dressing reminded Yu Qianqiu of the Native Americans in his previous life. Their styles were quite similar. One of them made Yu Qianqiu's eyes light up slightly. It was actually a beautiful woman. She had a strong and voluptuous body. Her two slender thighs with beautiful curves clamped on the horse's belly. Her full breasts were wrapped in animal skin. Coupled with her bronze-colored skin, she was filled with a wild beauty. It made people want to conquer her with a single look. However, she wore a 5-colored feather on her head, and the knives on her waist were of much better quality than the others. She also had the appearance of being supported by the crowd. She seemed to be the leader of these people. If one looked carefully, they would discover that on the naked arms of these people, there was a similar pattern drawn. It was exactly the same as the monster with many tentacles that Yu Qianqiu killed. A man next to the wild beauty suddenly waved his hand and pointed 100 meters away. He exclaimed, "Garland, look." Everyone's gaze followed. Yu Qianqiu also couldn't help but look back. He discovered that it was the ashes left behind after he killed the monster. The two men rode their horses and galloped over. They circled around the pile of ashes and examined it. Then they quickly galloped back. One of them nodded and said, "Garland, it should be the remains of a man-eating octopus, but it seems to have been burned to ashes by someone. The commotion just now should have come from here." In an instant, everyone's eyes were fixed on Yu Qianqiu. They were somewhat in awe. The wild and sexy beauty asked, "Did you kill the man-eating octopus?" Her gentle voice was mixed with undisguised brutality. It gave people a pure and natural feeling. It was very pleasant to listen to. Yu Qianqiu shook his head without hesitation and said, "I didn't kill it. The person who killed it has already flown away." He spread his arms and made a flying gesture. It was as disgusting as it could be. The reason why he didn't admit it was because he felt that he shouldn't take responsibility for everything before he understood the situation. It wasn't safe. In addition, from the pattern on these people's arms, he deduced that the dead monster might be their totem. If he admitted it, he might offend them. The group of people looked at each other and exclaimed, "Immortals!" Yu Qianqiu's eyebrows trembled slightly when he heard that. After the shock, the beauty called Garland asked doubtfully, "Which tribe are you from? How can you barge into our tribe's territory with your bare hands?" Yu Qianqiu was speechless. He felt very conflicted. Damn it! Is this the Eastern Holy Land? Why does it feel like I've come to a primitive society? He scratched his head and thought for a while. He pointed at his head and said, "I lost my memory. I can't remember anything. After I woke up, I found myself here." He lied casually, but this was the least credible lie in the long history of his lying. There was no other way. He didn't know anything about the situation here. Although the people in front of him were all mortals, who knew what kind of background they had. "Lost your memory?" Garland said in a daze. The group of people on horseback were dumbfounded. They looked at each other. Someone said to the person beside him, "Elder Meng from the tribe seems to have lost his memory because of his old age. He can't remember anything." "Big brother. That's called Alzheimer's, okay." Yu Qianqiu was speechless. Another person said, "I heard that someone in the tribe fell off his horse and hit his head on a rock. In the end, he also couldn't remember anything." Garland waved her hand and stopped everyone's discussion. She stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Looking at your gorgeous clothes, your attire isn't ordinary either. You should be someone from a faraway city." "If you're from a nearby tribe, we'll definitely know you." She looked around and continued, "There are often ferocious beasts around here. It's not safe for you to be here alone. Why don't you go back with us first? When you remember anything, we'll decide what to do." What a kind person. Even if he lost his memory, he would still believe it. Yu Qianqiu nodded repeatedly in agreement. He was still worried about not understanding the situation here. It would be best to go back with them and ask for some information. Unexpectedly, a man beside Garland stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Garland, this person's eyes are flickering. One look and you can tell that he's not a good person. If we bring him back, what if he's a spy sent by some tribe? The fence gathering is about to begin. We have to prevent anyone from betraying us warriors. Besides, how are you going to explain to the tribe elders if you suddenly bring a stranger back?" You're the one who can tell that you're not a good person. Yu Qianqiu cursed inwardly, but pretended that he didn't understand. Seeing that the others also nodded in agreement, Garland seemed a little hesitant. But when he saw Yu Qianqiu's obedient and pitiful look, he immediately said decisively, "Bring him back first and have someone guard him. I'll explain to the tribe elders. If they don't agree, it won't be too late to drive him away. Bodo, give him your horse." The one called Bodo was the strong man who stopped Yu Qianqiu from going back. He nodded helplessly and said, "All right." He jumped off the horse, pulled the reins over, and stuffed them into Yu Qianqiu's hands. Garland asked, "Do you know how to ride a horse?" Yu Qianqiu nodded. Garland nodded and said, "Follow us." With that, he took the lead and galloped away. Bodo climbed onto the back of another man's horse. The two of them rode side by side, and the group galloped away. Yu Qianqiu turned back to look at the indistinct Xianxian Island in the distance. He jumped onto the bareback horse without a saddle, pulled on the reins, and kicked the horse's belly with his heels. The horse's hooves kicked up yellow sand, and he quickly chased after the group of people in front of him. After about 15 minutes of running, they finally ran out of the yellow sand. Green grass began to appear around them. Not long after turning around a valley, a vast forest appeared in front of them. The group of people directly rode into the forest. After passing through the deep forest along a winding path, their eyes suddenly opened up. A wide lake as clear as a mirror lay quietly in the depths of the forest. It made them feel like they were in a fairy tale. Chapter 721. In the lush green grass beside the lake, there was a path that looked like gray ribbons. A dozen or so riders formed a line and galloped along the path to the foot of the short mountain ahead. It was a grayish-brown stone mountain. With Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, he could see at a glance that there were many caves on the mountain. There were people going in and out of the caves, so it was obviously used for living. As they ran past the lake, Yu Qianqiu, who was at the back, was a little dumbfounded. He couldn't help but look back. This was because there was actually a group of naked men and women happily bathing in the lake, near the foot of the mountain. Those women had their breasts exposed without the slightest scruple. In groups of 2 or 3, they were stirring the clear lake water and singing loud, beautiful, and aphrodisiac songs. F***ck, this is such a good place. Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up. As he looked at the people in the lake were also looking at him curiously. The reason was probably because they were curious to see him wearing so many clothes. When the group reached the foot of the mountain, they all dismounted. Bodo came over to lead his horse. Yu Qianqiu looked around, and saw that the grass at the foot of the mountain was surrounded by a fence. There were many horses tied to the fence, and the group of people were tying their horses to it. Inside the fence, there were many crude tents made of animal skin, and many children were running and playing among them, breathing in the fresh air filled with the smell of nature. And then looking at such a simple style, Yu Qianqiu sighed with emotion. Garland, who had tied the horse, walked over to him. She stood in front of him and looked at him for a while before saying, "Don't run around. I'll report to the elders. If they agree to let you stay, then you can stay. Otherwise, they'll drive you out." "Understood." Yu Qianqiu nodded with a smile. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at Garland's body. Only then did he realize that this woman's figure was even better when she was standing. She had a strong waist, full breasts, and perky buttocks. Coupled with the wild aura she exuded, she was truly pleasing to the eye. Garland didn't care about his lecherous eyes at all. He waved his hand, and 2 men came out of the people who came with him. They crossed their strong arms in front of their chests and stared at him from both sides. They seemed to be monitoring him, afraid that he would run away. Yu Qianqiu didn't mind. He watched as Garland walked into a cave at the top of the mountain. Then he glanced at the 2 people on his left and right, turned around with his hands behind his back, and looked leisurely at the people bathing by the lake. He thought to himself, looking at it with pure appreciation, it's really primitive. However, what was even more primitive was yet to come. Not long after, the men and women who were bathing in the lake walked up to the shore hand in hand and hugged each other, kissing and touching each other without restraint. Soon after, Pairs of them fell on the grass by the lake and began to copulate on the spot. In an instant, the quiet lakeside was filled with gasps and moans. F***CK. Group. Field team? Yu Qianqiu's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He was truly dumbfounded. The situation was far beyond his expectations. Shoo. Shoo. Suddenly, he heard a loud and clear whistle. Yu Qianqiu silently turned his head and looked to both sides. He saw that the two strong men were beaming with joy. They put their fingers in their mouths and whistled hard. They even spread their limbs and made bodybuilding poses towards the lakeside, activating the strong muscles on their arms. The most terrifying thing was that the children who were originally running and playing inside the fence were also clinging to the fence, waving their arms and shouting at the people who were copulating by the lake. It was a little like a cheerleader in a sports competition. And the men who were working hard by the lake also worked even harder. The more intense gasps and moans intertwined with each other. Lingering and lingering. Oh my God! I've seen everything in my life, but I've never seen this. Yu Qianqiu's head drooped down powerlessly. He was completely speechless by these people. And when the two men who were monitoring him saw his dejected look, they suddenly looked proud. One of them walked to Yu Qianqiu's side, showing off his burly body that was nearly 2 meters tall, and compared it with Yu Qianqiu's small body, revealing a look of infinite contempt. Yu Qianqiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this moment. Garland ran down from the mountain. She was slightly stunned when she saw the dejected Yu Qianqiu, and then looked at the two men who were demonstrating by the side. She couldn't help but giggle. Yu Qianqiu raised his head and looked at her. He shook his head and sighed slightly. He really didn't know what to say. Who would have thought that a man beside him would suddenly jump in front of Garland and dance his hands and feet to show off his robust body? He kept dancing provocatively as if he was courting her. As a result, Yu Qianqiu was once again dumbfounded. Yu Qianqiu was even thinking, could it be that any man or woman here could do that? Garland patted his strong chest and pushed him away. The man immediately became listless. Garland walked to Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, "Someone who lost his memory, can you still remember your name?" Yu Qianqiu was taken aback. Yu Qianqiu? What a strange name. Garland mumbled and said, "The elders said that women can reproduce, and children are the future of the tribe. As for men, they have to bear the responsibility of protecting and raising the tribe. Our tribe doesn't take in useless men. If you can hunt a wolf or any ferocious beast in the forest to prove that you are a real man, then our tribe will be willing to take you in temporarily. Otherwise, we won't waste food on you and will expel you. Do you have the courage to accept this test?" Yu Qianqiu looked at himself up and down. Did he look so weak that he couldn't even kill the alpha wolf? To be honest, he didn't want to stay here at all. Mingling with this group of primitive people was too unbecoming of his identity as the dignified Phantom Region's torture master. However, he didn't know how deep the waters of the Eastern Holy Land were. He had to find a foothold and spend some time to understand it. Otherwise, he might get into trouble if he just barged around randomly. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he touched his nose and said, "Accepting the test is not a problem. I would like to ask, what tribe are you from?" He subconsciously looked at the group of people fighting in the wild by the lake. "Cannibals," Garland said with a smile. In the end, it gave Yu Qianqiu a fright. He said in shock, "Cannibals?" The two men at the side immediately laughed out loud, as if they were looking down on Yu Qianqiu's cowardice. "Don't be afraid." Garland also chuckled. She pointed at the totem on her arm and said, "This is a man-eating octopus. They have been multiplying since a long time ago. They originally lived in the sea, but for some unknown reason, they were confined even though the sea was so close to them. The animals on land could no longer enjoy the embrace of the sea, and these man-eating octopuses slowly got used to life on land. They like to hide under the sand and hunt people or animals that pass by. Because they are the strongest and most ferocious beast in our tribe, they have become the symbol of our tribe. This is why we are called cannibals, not because we eat people." "Oh." Yu Qianqiu nodded to show that he understood. Then he asked, "Then how do I accept the test? Do I go hunting in the forest now? You must be accompanied by our people to see you kill a ferocious beast with their own eyes." As Garland spoke, She suddenly pointed and said with a smile, "Tomorrow, you will go hunting with them." Yu Qianqiu turned his head and saw a group of people coming out of the forest on one side, returning with all kinds of beasts they had hunted. They were carrying the beasts on their backs, hands, and shoulders. It could be said that they had returned with a full load, especially the strong man at the front, who was carrying a big brown bear on his shoulder. It was probably a few hundred kilograms. Even Yu Qianqiu was a little surprised to see that a mortal could carry such a heavy thing. He must be really strong. When the group returned, it immediately attracted the cheers of the children around them. They all ran to greet them, and at the same time, they wanted to see how many kinds of prey they had hunted today, and what the most ferocious prey was. The man carrying the big brown bear walked directly towards them. Suddenly, he threw the prey on the ground with a bang, and even the ground shook. This burly man, who was more than 2 meters tall, walked so far with a heavy load. But his face was not red, and he was not panting. He was looking at Yu Qianqiu curiously with a pair of big eyes. "This is Bodo's brother, Boli. He is the strongest warrior and man here." Garland smiled and introduced him to Yu Qianqiu. Then he introduced Boli. "This is a poor man with amnesia. His name is Yu Qianqiu. He will go hunting with you tomorrow. If he can kill a ferocious beast, the elders will temporarily take him in." Boli was stunned, and then he pointed at Yu Qianqiu and laughed boorishly. "Even the thinnest man here is stronger than you. You can hunt ferocious beasts with that body of yours? If your neck is bitten off by a beast, you will lose your life. I advise you to leave this place." Yu Qianqiu really wanted to go up and beat him up, but he had a faint smile on his face as he said, "I can give it a try. If I really get my neck bitten off by a wild beast, that's my fate." He imitated the way the people here spoke. Boli was still shaking his head. Garland said unhappily, "Boli, the elders have agreed." Boli was stunned. He looked at Yu Qianqiu and nodded. "All right then. We will take you with us tomorrow." Then he turned to the men and women who had finished their business by the lake and waved his arms, shouting, "Woo!" The men and women ran over and helped to unload the prey from the horses' backs. They were very happy to see so many prey. At this moment, Boli suddenly picked Garland up and walked to the lake with her in his arms. Garland also hooked her arms around his neck and gazed at him affectionately. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. He could only watch as the two of them went to the lakeside and stripped off the few pieces of clothing they had left to bathe together. After taking a bath, they unscrupulously did vigorous exercises by the lake. After seeing this unrestrained scene, Yu Qianqiu's expression seemed to be used to it. However, the thoughts he had about Garland at the beginning had been thrown out of his mind, and he felt a little nauseous. He looked into the distance, wondering where Bai Changchun had gone. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.